watching closely.
What's the secret, Max?
You just gotta find something you love to do and then do it for the rest of your life.
I don't want to be a product of my environment. I want my environment to be a product of me.
Hello, and welcome to The Establishing Shot, a podcast where we do deep dives into directors and their filmographies. I am your host, Eli Price, and we are here on episode 74 of the podcast. Still making our way through Spielberg movies. This is we're into the 2000s now. His first film of the 2000s, AI, Artificial Intelligence. No colon, just the letters and then what they mean. So he kind of did the same thing with E.T. though. So yeah. But I'm joined by a returning guest. This is his third time on joining me for, well, I guess the first time it was like one episode, but the last time is when I started splitting to two. So technically this will be your fourth episode, but third time with us recording together.
That's right. But you split it. That's right.
Yeah. Because now we're going to be doing a draft episode together. So we're going to hit 4 and 5 as far as your episodes with me. So, so you're a Establishing Shot veteran at this point. Zachary, I didn't say your name yet. Zachary Lee.
Yes. No, thank you, Eli. It's great to be back here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have Zachary on with me again to talk about AI, artificial intelligence, Spielberg's another entry into the Spielberg sci-fi, I guess, filmography. You could probably do a whole podcast just on like his sci-fi entries, which would
100%.
probably be interesting.
You should group those together on the website. You know, when you do it.
That's a good idea.
It's
probably a good idea to maybe throw some like genre tags on those.
Yeah,
that might be good. But yeah, Zachary is he wears a few different hats. He does some writing, some freelance writing, and does some writing about film, which is why I really enjoy having him on. He brings his own perspective and you know, has some experience analyzing films through his writing, and so yeah, I'm excited. I've also seen that Zachary has been attending some festivals, some film festivals recently. What's been your favorite? Maybe a few standouts from the festivals you've been able to make it to.
It's a great question. I feel like for reference, it was funny, like September, I was talking about this with my supervisor today, where I'm like, I feel like October and September just didn't exist as months, for a variety of reasons. But partly because I was traveling, but I was able to go to the Toronto Festival and then Fantastic Fest, and then I'm based in Chicago, so Chicago had their own festival as well. So happy to shout out like a rec from each fest, just something to keep an eye on and think about. I'm trying to think. I really enjoyed this movie called The Return out of Toronto. If y'all have heard, it's coming out in December of this year, but it's like I'm a sucker for any like Odyssey adaptation or like Greek myth stuff, and this is an adaptation of like the last part of the Odyssey, where it's Ray Fiennes as Odysseus and Julia Binoche as Penelope, and it's just like I don't know, it's like that's like one already a fun, like this is the third time those two have collaborated. It was a very like it is like a slow burn, somber, meditative piece, but you know, just having those two there, I feel like elevate the material. I feel like we haven't had like the last Greek like mythology movie I remember was like Clash of the Titans. Which is not, known, as many things. It is not historically accurate.
Not peak cinema.
Yeah, exactly. So Return sort of gets you there, which I thought was really great. Fantastic Fest. This one you guys can actually stream right now. It's called Mads. It's this the cool thing about this is it's a zombie apocalypse movie, but it's shot entirely in one take. So
Okay.
that's all I really want to say. It's on Shutter. It's like a crisp 90 minutes. It's
Hmm.
very fun, very high intensity, and it feels like, movies that can be multiple, like one take, you're kind of like, well, that just feels like a gimmick and not really
Yeah.
like, I feel like the way they use this to like build tension and follow
Mhm.
different characters is really cool. So say Mads, and then at Chicago, there's this documentary I saw called Between Goodbyes that I thought was really
Okay.
great. It's about this Korean adoptee who visits her original mother and soul and her family. And it's just like, I don't know, it's a really touching story of like, you formed your own life apart from you, and it's this, and then you come back to meet
Mhm.
your family, and you're just like, how do we, like, what's our relationship now when we've lived so much of our
Yeah.
life apart? So, and in some ways, the idea of family ties well with what we're going to talk about for this episode too.
Yeah.
So that's what
Yeah.
I'll
It
shout out.
reminds
Yeah.
me of two other movies that are not documentaries, but well, one of them is, I guess, like a quasi. It's like a dramatized, um, written out version. But The Farewell is a real story.
That's a great, great connection, or great point. Yeah.
But it Past Lives too from last year's kind of deals with some of that stuff.
Very,
Um,
very. That's a great like
and
mood board for
yeah.
those movies. Yeah.
Yeah. Ironically, all East Asian subjects as well.
Maybe there's something there. Well,
Maybe.
gotta write a piece about that. East Asians and longing to connect with their families. Great observation.
Yeah, we can make maybe a letterbox list of those.
Exactly.
Movies.
Honestly, that'd be really good. Yeah. But yeah.
Well, sweet. Yeah, I'll have to definitely check those out. The Return sounds very enticing to me.
Yes. Are you an Odyssey or Iliad fan?
I feel like I read sections of those while I was in school and haven't really returned to them since. But there's I guess there is the kind of timelessness of those stories that is always intriguing. But even more just is having Fiennes and Binoche. I'm like, yeah, I'm interested.
Yeah. That's how I felt too.
I was just able to see Conclave. We're recording on November 1st. This will release later. This will probably be releasing. Oh, this will be releasing maybe in January. So it'll be a while before this releases. Yeah. So we're we're way ahead.
We'll have seen The Return, hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully you'll have seen The Return. If not, it'll probably be streaming.
I mean,
somewhere.
You know how it is these days.
Able to rent. Yeah. I just saw Conclave with Fiennes. And
what'd you think of that?
I thought it was a good movie. Not great. It's one of those movies where the end is kind of like, oh, okay. I don't think you really earned this ending, but it's like an unearned twist.
Interesting.
I think like it kind of plays into some of the discussions and themes that lead up to it, I guess. But yeah, I didn't like dislike the ending. I was just kind of like, oh, okay. I didn't know we were getting like a twist ending, but okay.
In a movie of many twists already, they had to throw another one at you. Yeah.
But no, it's really, really well done, well acted, compelling. But I mean, because even though like the twist ending kind of like was like, oh, okay, to me is it's still compelling. And so yeah, I thought it was good. It's not one of my favorites of the year, but I enjoyed watching it. So but yeah, Fiennes. Anytime Fiennes is coming in for something, I'm like, yeah, I'm interested.
That's great. Oh, I know you've been busy on your letterbox too, though. I've been seeing. I was like,
yeah, I have a lot of catching up to do on my Letterboxd. It always gets to the end of the year, and I have like a list in my notes of like movies I've watched and the date I watched them.
Yeah.
Because like as soon as I finish a movie, I'll like pop it in the note and I'll be like, oh, I'll log that, and then it'll be like months will go by and I'll have like a bunch of movies to log.
No, it's great.
Yeah. So like sometime at the end of the year, I usually always like just go back and log all of them eventually.
Oh, totally. You gotta
Uh,
get those. You can see your stats for the year.
yeah,
That's
yeah, you got to get
kind of
those stats. It's
yeah,
the all important stats.
the all important stats to know what
uh,
it is.
but yeah, yeah, I guess we can. There's not a good segue here, but we'll just hard cut to talking about AI,
Yeah,
artificial intelligence.
let's do it.
Um, yeah, so this is, like I said, Spielberg's first movie of the 2000s, coming off of Saving Private Ryan, which I haven't recorded that episode yet, um, so I'm interested to see how that's gonna play into like him going that transition from like Saving Private Ryan to this, which
Right,
just
exactly.
very different movies.
Totally.
But yeah, I guess the turn of the decade slash century slash millennia called for, I guess, a switch in in Spielberg's I guess film subject. So
Yeah.
but AI didn't start with Spielberg. I feel like it's decently well known that this
Mhm.
was actually a Stanley Kubrick project, and it started all the way back in 1982, the year that E.T.
Oh wow.
came out. Kubrick bought the option on the rights to adapt a 1969 short story by Brian Aldiss, which was published in Harper's Bazaar magazine called Super Toys Last All Summer Long.
Mm.
And did you happen to like read that or listen to it?
Like Superboys or just
The Super Toys Last All Summer Long.
I had it. No,
Yeah, yeah,
that's. I knew the Kubrick connection, but I didn't know
yeah,
about that. Yeah, that's
yeah. So
interesting.
I guess you would say it's an adaptation of it. It's in this short story. Oh no,
So, there we go.
you back?
Okay, I think you're back. Okay, great.
No
Continue.
worries. I
That's
have a
pretty
good
fresh.
jump in point.
Okay,
All
great.
right. Yeah, in this story, so it has
Mm-hmm.
David and
Great.
Teddy and the mom and dad. So David in this story is kind of like having conversations with Teddy about love and what's real and what's not real. Um, and eventually the mom kind of interacts with them some, and it's kind of like it kind of has the feeling of the first act of this movie, where there's like this kind of unease between
Yeah.
everyone. And then at the end of the short story, the dad comes home and he's like, "Hey, we've been given permission to have a child."
Oh, interesting.
And then so they don't have a child yet in the short
Yeah.
story, and they're given permission, I guess, in this future world to have a child. And so David overhears it, and then it just kind of ends with like him and Teddy just like wondering what's going to become of them
Yeah,
now.
that's kind of wild.
And that's the end of it.
Dang.
So yeah, so really that's just like it's similar to like the first act of the movie. So it's interesting that Kubrick kind of took that idea in that short story and just like expanded it out a whole lot. But yeah, so obviously Kubrick had interest in artificial intelligence that had only grown since making 2001 A Space
Mhm.
Odyssey, which had come out in 1968. So he was an avid reader of scientific magazine. He'd even had like a bunch of discussions with a pioneer in the field of AI named Marvin Minsky. And this is a quote from Kubrick that I wrote down. He said, quote, "One of the fascinating questions that arise in envisioning computers more intelligent than men is at what point the machine intelligence deserves the same consideration as biological
Mhm.
intelligence. You could be tempted to ask yourself, in what way is a machine intelligence any less sacrosanct than biological intelligence? And it might be difficult to arrive at an answer flattering to biological intelligence." So that kind of shows you where Kubrick is, like his
Yeah.
headspace in like wanting to take on this story. he's interested in those ideas of like what's the separation between biological and machine intelligence, where like what are the lines, at what point do they start to like blend, um and even like I read elsewhere that Kubrick kind of was interested in the idea of like artificial intelligence being like the vessel that carries on our existence after we're
Yeah,
gone as
which is
humans,
interesting. Yeah,
which kind of plays
totally.
into this movie. Um, and so yeah, so Kubrick contacted Brian Aldiss about adapting the
Yeah.
book, um, and Aldiss is like interested in helping him, but then Kubrick tells him that he plans to mix in the story Pinocchio by Carlo Collodi, the 1883 book,
Okay.
and also repercussions of global warming. And Aldous is like, nah, I don't really like those
Yeah.
ideas. They didn't really like jive with his taste,
Interesting.
and
Okay.
and so he was like, you go ahead and do your thing, but I'm not going to be involved.
Crazy. Okay.
And so yeah, and so so really like this early on, he's already thinking about how to mix in Pinocchio into this
Yeah.
story, and that's Kubrick's idea, not Spielberg's. Which a lot of people thought the Pinocchio stuff was
Right.
Spielberg.
It seems
because,
most like that he would do something like that, given his
Right.
filmography. Yeah.
right. And so I actually listened to Pinocchio on audiobook this week, because I'd never read it before,
Nice.
and it's much harsher than the
The
Disney movie for sure.
Why do I feel like
It's
it's like there's always this like second coming of age as like once we grow
yeah.
older, we're like, oh wow, like Disney really did not give the full picture about these
Mhm.
other stories that we read, you know?
Yeah, Guillermo del Toro's version is much more like, he does his own like twists on it, but like the general like tone feels much more like the book.
Is Mussolini in the book? I just need to know for my own question.
No.
That's I was wondering.
Not at
Okay.
all.
That
Not-
that did
not in the
seem like a
least
Del
bit.
Toro embellishment, but hey, I want to give you credit, you know, for where it's good. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the book came out in 1883.
Oh well, there
so
we go.
so yeah, all that is Del
That's
Toro.
right. Good to know.
Which I love. I love
Yeah,
that.
great.
His version. But yeah, the story is basically like Pinocchio does something. He tries to be good, but then he does something bad, and then there's some like harsh consequence for it.
Yeah.
And that's just like over and over again through the whole book.
Totally. Oh yeah.
So it kind of the movie kind of follows a similar
Mhm.
pattern. Like David tries to be a good boy, but then does something that somebody doesn't like, and there's harsh consequences for it.
Yeah.
Like over and over
As
again.
it happens. Yeah.
But yeah, so the Pinocchio thing though, like and just the idea of like crossing fairy tale with sci-fi, is a big reason that in 1985 Kubrick told Spielberg about this project, which seems unlikely because Kubrick was pretty like held his like projects with a tight grasp. But yeah, he just felt like this was something that Spielberg would be able to help him with in some way. But their relationship went back 6 years, even 6 years earlier. They had met, Spielberg and Kubrick, and had occasional conversations. There was even an occasion on Temple of Doom that was maybe listeners remember. In Temple of Doom, I talked about where Stanley Kubrick's daughter was lobbying against the treatment of snakes and reptiles on the
That's
set, and so there's a little bit of friction
Yeah.
there, I guess, at one point. But yeah, Kubrick, and just kind of his like laser focus on his craft and searching for like new information about like directing and the way other people do things. I read that he had kind of a habit of calling Steven Spielberg on his own terms and grilling him about his job and his life and his projects. And Kubrick never gave any detail of his own like life or projects or anything. He was just like, it wasn't like Spielberg would call him. It was always like Kubrick calls Spielberg on his own whenever he wants to talk, and then grills him about his
Right.
stuff, and then is like, okay, I got what I needed.
He's setting the terms for it. That's really
Yes,
funny.
very much so. But yeah, so fast forward through 6 years of that, and he decides to share finally about this project with Spielberg, in 1985, and Spielberg loves it. He even says at one point, "This is the best story you've ever had to tell," to Kubrick. And Kubrick probably shared it with him because he was aware of like those Spielbergian elements in the story. There's a lost child in search of love, feelings of exclusion, the Pinocchio references. You have the "When You Wish Upon a Star," like all through close
That's
encounters,
right.
and then
Lots of those
E.T. kind of
references
has
back
some of that.
to something.
Yeah. So all that's there. He tells him about it in 1985. I'm sure he's kind of like getting some ideas from Spielberg or telling him what his ideas are. But at this point, he hasn't yet asked Spielberg to direct it. He kind of moves on. He's struggling to get a script written. He collaborates with some sci-fi authors like Arthur C. Clarke, who wrote 2001 with him, Bob Shaw, Sarah Maitland, and then Ian Watson, who actually becomes kind of the most substantial contributor. Him and Kubrick kind of wrote this long, I think even in the credits, like when the credits roll, it says screen story by Stanley Kubrick and Ian Watson. And it's basically like this big storyboard of like all the stuff that they were planning on possibly doing. And Ian Watson's actually the one that kind of came up with the character Gigolo Joe. So
a lot of questions already about that. But yeah, that's great.
But yeah, he also brings on illustrator Chris Baker, who goes by the pseudonym Fangorn. And he supplied nearly 2,000 drawings for Kubrick. You can see a lot of them just like online or on the special features of like the Blu-ray or whatever. They're really good. And when you look at them, you're like, wow, a lot of these are like, you can see how like directly they used his concept art to like move it to the screen. And they're really cool. But yeah, Kubrick really wanted to do a like robot boy to play David.
That's right.
He was just like, the technology's just not there. And so he was still really hesitant to move forward with the project. But Jurassic Park comes out and he's like, okay, maybe I have some hope here. Maybe I can work with this. He drafts like a 87-page script, and then he even does some like consulting with Dennis Muren with ILM about using digital imagery for mechas. And I think he also talks with James Cameron's VFX, which was Digital Domain, and this other guy, Chris Cunningham, who had done some like a robotic Bjork in a music video. And Kubrick still decides at the end of all that the technology's still not up to reproducing human appearance and movement and all that that he would need to make the story happen. And he had even ordered like an animatronic modeled after his nephew that just like didn't work at all.
It's so interesting though, because like I think about, I don't know if you've been seeing like James Cameron like making technology to like, or like not making Avatar movies until the technology was there, or like literally making it, or I don't know if this is right, of like Nolan, is he like making IMAX camera, like these things that were never made before to like have it happen. So it's just interesting. I'm like, because if like Kubrick had more time, I mean, I guess he didn't know, like, I mean, I know he passed early, but it's like he seems like someone who wouldn't have mind waiting either. I'm sure it'd just be weird to think of like he's like, I'm not going to make this until there's the technology that's there to like make the replicant boy or whatever that he wanted to do.
Yeah, and it seemed like that was kind of the case. Like he was like, well, I'm just gonna wait until I can make it like I want to make it. So one of the reasons he didn't go, he had considered Joseph Mazzello, who was the boy in Jurassic Park, for the role of David. But he just was self-aware enough to know that he had like really long shoots, and was like obsessively perfectionist.
Yeah.
And like very self-aware about that, and knew that was incompatible with like a child growing.
Yeah. Good foresight,
like,
Kubrick.
You need the child to like appear the same through the whole movie, and if you're taking so long to make your movie, then the child's gonna grow and look different.
That's interesting.
So, but he also knew that Spielberg would not have that problem, because Spielberg at this point in his career was usually pretty efficient with his films. And so 10 years after telling Spielberg about the project in 1995, he suggested that Spielberg direct it. He even said to Spielberg, quote, "This is much closer to your sensibilities than my own," unquote. And he says that if he would direct it, he'd be happy to produce it. And they kind of talked back and forth about it. They even there's a story about like Spielberg had a fax machine installed like in his bedroom.
Oh yeah.
And he would be getting like faxes in the middle of the night, and his wife Kate Capshaw made him move it out of their room.
It's the same thing we had before, right? Where like Kubrick's like, I can ask you the questions, but that's it. Yeah.
Right.
You can't bother me, but I'm gonna make sure I bother you, sort of a thing.
Oh, you froze up.
Oh, oops. Okay, got it. Yeah, you're back. Yeah. Okay, I think are we good? Or
are you back?
Yes, I am. I think so.
You kind of froze up. I heard like a couple of the things you said. But
I was just joking
mostly
about how like what is it? It just underscores the point of how Kubrick was like, I want to have access to your Spielberg's time at all points, but Spielberg was like, what? No, I can't do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so they just faxed each other, and they even spent like 2 months going over storyboards. But like a couple of different, Spielberg really felt like Kubrick should be the one to direct it, and he had his own projects going on, and then Kubrick dove into making Eyes Wide Shut. And so the talks on it kind of like died down. But yeah, then, Kubrick dies suddenly, unexpectedly, in March of 1999, and without ever, really getting anything made for AI. And so this finally convinces Spielberg to make it. His Kubrick's widow and his brother-in-law Jan Harlan, who was a producer, approached Spielberg, and they, I heard somewhere that like Kubrick's widow, I can't think of her name, unfortunately.
No.
Had like called Spielberg and been like, "Hey, if you don't make this, it's not going to get made." And she really wanted it to get made, and so for in memory of her husband. So yeah, Spielberg worked really hard on. He was like, "Okay, I'll do it," and kind of saw it both as like an opportunity to have like to do homage to this master's filmmaker, and also to kind of like measure himself up to a personal hero. He loved Kubrick's work, and so yeah, that's part of the reason why he took on the task of writing the screenplay himself.
Oh, okay, interesting.
And so he had spent so much time going back and forth with Kubrick about the project, and he just felt like he wouldn't be able to like adequately relay Kubrick's vision to someone else. And so he just was like, I guess I'll write it I'm gonna write this on my own. So he hadn't done that since Close Encounters. Um, so it had been, the 70s since he had written a screenplay himself, and he hasn't done that since either.
Oh,
So
interesting.
so he really took it seriously, the trying to be true to Kubrick's story. Um, and yeah, he really ends up sticking to Kubrick's story for, like, especially the first and final acts of the film. Spielberg talks about those being like all Kubrick. Like, he stuck almost word for word to, like, Kubrick's script and screenplay for those sections of the
Yeah.
film. And then he kind of puts his own twists and ideas in the middle section. So, like, for example, Rouge City is Kubrick kind of had this, like, replica of Sodom and Gomorrah, whereas Spielberg kind of, like, scrapped that and kind of made it more like this mix of Las Vegas and
Yeah,
Oz.
that's right.
And yeah, and one of the things he really had to work hard on was he had always approached sci-fi films in contemporary context. So you think about, like, Close Encounters and E.T., and they were contemporary films, but with aliens coming in.
Yeah.
And this is like pure futurism. So he actually had to, like, create a completely different world for the first time. He'd never really done
Yeah.
that before. Which, even like Hook,
Yeah.
which is kind of a fantastical world, is still, like, based in, the real world. It's pirate ships and, an island, and it's not like, it's just kind of piecing together, like, parts of the real world. This is like a true, like, future world that doesn't exist. So yeah, I thought that was interesting. But yeah, that was kind of like the beginnings of the movie, where it originated from, the Kubrick Spielberg relationship. But yeah, I guess take a little turn and go through the cast and crew. The crew is really a crew of returning collaborators this go around. Kathleen Kennedy and Bonnie Curtis produce it with Spielberg. I already mentioned the Brian Aldiss story it's based on. And then even like I said, the screen story by Kubrick and Ian Watson get screen credit as well. Spielberg with the screenplay. You have Janusz Kaminski coming back as the DP to do the cinematography. But basically, like, Janusz Kaminski and Michael Kahn we're going to hear those names, and really John Williams too.
Oh yeah.
With the music, we hear those names for the rest of Spielberg's career. Really,
he's locking
Janusz
in his
Kaminski
crew
does,
right now. Exactly.
Yeah, Kaminski does all of his movies from here on out so far. Unless Spielberg finally releases another one.
That's right.
But yeah, the Gary Rydstrom and Richard Hims do the sound, which they're returning Spielberg collaborators. Rick Carter on the production design, another returning collaborator. For the art direction, Richard Johnson and Thomas Valentine are new names to me, I think. But William James Teagarden has done some art direction for him in the past. Really, the new people are the people, like, doing some of the design work. So, like, the concept art done by Chris Baker. I mentioned he had done some work for Kubrick on the project, and Spielberg brought him on to keep doing that work with him. So he kept him involved. So that was a new collaboration. Candace Neal did the hair. V. Neal, spelled differently, so no relation, did the makeup. And Bob Ringwood, I think, is actually a returner for the costumes.
Great.
He's done some costume work with Spielberg before, but they really, like, those four people really have a huge influence on how this movie looks. Just like the design wise. So, shout out to them. There's some cool stuff with them on the special features of the Blu-ray too.
Nice.
So,
Which, did you watch this on Blu-ray? Did you have it already or no? Okay.
Yeah.
That's nice. I was just
Yeah.
renting it, so I'd be curious to see what hear about those features and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. There's basically like a broken up making of documentary, full making of documentary that's like not quite 2 hours long on the Blu-ray.
Yeah, that's
So,
cool.
yeah. Some more returners. You have special effects supervisor in Michael Lantieri, and then some visual effects guys in Dennis Murin, Scott Farrar, and Henry Labunta. Who those last two don't sound familiar, but Dennis Murin, of course, is the ILM guy. And then Stan Winston does the robots and animatronics, and he's returned. Lantieri, Murin, and Winston are like the unsung heroes of Jurassic Park. So those guys were like crucial for this movie too. So yeah, really like a bunch of returning collaborators. So he's really like, it was probably a very like smooth production because of that. I would imagine.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's talk about the cast, because the cast is interesting. I think.
Yeah. Well, it's to your point that it just speaks to like him finding his people and like being able to. You'll see like it gives a certain comfort and familiarity when you create too. So when you know.
Yeah, for sure.
There. But yeah.
For sure. Yeah, and that probably plays into his casting too,
Totally.
Because he hadn't worked with Haley Joel Osment before, but he really wanted a child actor that had experience. He didn't want like some unknown talent to play David, and so yeah, I mean, Osment had been in Forrest Gump when he was 5 years old at 94. He had been in this movie Bogus in 96 with Whoopi Goldberg, which I don't know anything about, at 7 years old. And then, of course, most people remember he was Oscar nominated for his role in The Sixth Sense when he was 10 years old. So
Stacks, was there another kid actor that acclaimed at the time? I feel like
I don't think
probably
so.
Not, yeah.
And so Haley Joel Osment was really like Spielberg's first and only choice. There, it's fun. It's cool in the Blu-ray special features. There's like a whole little like 10, I don't know how long it is, 5 to 10 minutes of like interview with Haley Joel Osment. And he's like so adult. He's like, the way he talks is like, he might as well be another like adult actor, like talking about his involvement with the movie.
That's so funny.
Yeah, like he sounds so like mature, and I'm like, man, this kid is something else.
Precocious young lad. Yeah, there you go.
Yes. But yeah, he talks with Spielberg before the script was done, and had a kind of a casual conversation, which is pretty typical of Spielberg with kids. He doesn't like throw it all at them at once, kind of like ease them in, But yeah, then he read the script and was excited to do it. And man, he really took on a lot for this. He had 3 hours of school each day, which always plays in when you have a child actor.
Yeah.
He talked about how they had gotten his makeup down to like 30 minutes. So they did like this waxy spray on
to like
him
give that
to
like
make him
artificial look or something.
Yeah. So it wasn't as intensive as Jude Law's makeup, because he's supposed to look more human, because he's like a newer, I guess like David is like a newer model of mecha that's supposed to look more and more human. But yeah. Osment, his dad was actually an acting coach, or had done something like that. His dad was able to like actually help him with his acting. He had experience in that, and so he would help him like understand subtext for scenes and stuff like that.
That's good to know.
Yeah,
some added context.
Yeah, and then I mean, I'm sure it helped a ton for how good he was, and already having as much experience as he did. But yeah, I mean, he's great. He has to carry Teddy around. Teddy weighed like 20 to
That's
30 pounds.
crazy to think about.
So he like had to carry this like
I always
teddy
forget how
around.
props are just never what you would think they are. There's always
Yes.
a deeper context to what's being there. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because the teddy, there was like a special teddy that was a carryable teddy, but he still like had robotics in him, and so that he could like do some movements. And so he wasn't light; he was like 20 or 30 pounds, I think. But and then the big thing that I was like most impressed with was that I didn't realize, but when he said it, I was like, oh yeah, that's true. Is that he didn't blink in any take? So like through the whole movie, you never see David blink.
I need to rewatch through this now. I don't think I
know.
really noticed or thought of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Been a while.
But it adds to that effect though. So I guess he had to really practice not blinking.
He committed to it. That's crazy.
Yeah. But yeah, we'll talk more about the character later. But other cast. But before we move on, I mean, Osment is like so essential
Totally
to this movie working. He really, really like nails it, I think, with the kind of like that feeling of not quite feeling human.
Oh yeah.
So I mean, just huge props to old HJO.
Yeah, exactly. For being able to do that.
But
very impressive.
Jude Law plays Gigolo Joe. And he's kind of coming off The Talented Mr. Ripley, so he's pretty like famous right now in the world of acting. And yeah, he does a lot of work too. He does 3 months of rehearsals with a choreographer, Francesca Janes. They're trying to like mix in some different elements for the way like that Gigolo Joe moves. So it's a mix of 1930s gigolos with, their big tailed suits or whatever, and the way they kind of move, real classy like and whatnot. That was Spielberg's kind of input. But then he mixes in like some Fred Astaire, like the way Fred Astaire moves, and also like the kind of like more playful way that Gene Kelly would move as well. And he worked with a choreographer to like mix all that stuff together, but do it like in a sort of robotic way. So I really love the way he moves in the movie. I think it's really fun, and
it's it's a very fluid kind of character, which I think is like hard to get, and it speaks to like him being a newer model, right? Or to like to Haley's character, right, in some way too. So so there's that newness that's there. It's like, well, that's the thing that struck me was I'd be curious, because do you have the like Blu-ray or like the, because I watched this on Paramount Plus, which I mean, I don't know if it's like, it could be a variety of things, or like my TV. It just didn't. It looked a little weird, but I'm like, maybe that's the point. I don't know, like not as crisp,
like his character.
Yeah, like it was a little too. Which I mean, we can get into that more later. But I'm like, maybe this is underscoring the theme here. But I'm curious if like the Blu-ray or 4K or something is like more crystallized or something.
No, we can talk about that, because that is part of his design. So
how he looks, that's right.
Yeah, so like from like the clothes, so Bob Ringwood kind of with his clothes was blending this, like the three things he mentioned were Dracula, Elvis, and like a romantic hero of the Victorian era.
Great.
So he's mixing those three things, and the clothes were like basically made of some kind of like plastic, so that the clothes look very like artificial. But then he would put on, so like he had like the artificially slicked back hair, so like they really slicked it back, and then she would like airbrush his hairline to make it look like, how you can see like a doll's hairline, like where they like sewed the hair in. It kind of gave it like that sort of look. And then he had like a latex foam chin prosthetic.
Okay, so it was a whole affair.
And
to get
then
it there,
and then like layers and layers of makeup to kind of give that sheen synthetic look. So yeah, it was purposeful. I
Okay.
think the kind of like the way he looks kind of fake.
Thank you. Yeah, I was like not like
Yeah.
deep fake per se that level, but like not
Right.
very. I mean, I'm like they got the inhuman element there.
Yeah.
You know. So yeah.
Yeah. So that was all like part of his character was just fakeness. I guess we'll never know how fake things were downstairs because we cut away from that scene from that scene when he's
Which let me say,
thank goodness because I don't want to know.
I don't want to know either. This movie, man, I like it. It's getting I forgot that I'm like. I'm sure it was a jump to see Spielberg stuff from before. I mean, I guess he had done his war movie at this point, so it's not like he's like only family friendly. But like, I'm like, oh, it's a kid, like it's not, and then it's like, oh, they're really getting into it here, you know?
Yeah. Oh, it's Gigolo Joe, and
no, literally, I know.
Lady is worried about what he's got going on.
It's crazy. I was like, Spielberg. Like, that's why I keep wondering, like, is this a Spielberg thing or a Kubrick thing? Is it both of these guys? You know, or it's all there.
Yeah, I think Gigolo Joe was one of those characters that was not very fleshed out. So there's a lot of I think Spielberg developed out that character a whole lot more than Kubrick had. So, which is surprising. You would think the like darker stuff would be more Kubrick, but it seems like a lot of the dark stuff was kind of was in the middle part, at least, was Spielberg too. So I guess the rest of the cast is like there's not a whole lot to talk about with the rest of the cast. Frances O'Connor plays Monica Swinton. She's kind of a lesser known English actor. Then you have Sam Robards playing the dad, Henry Swinton. And I didn't know this. He's the son of Jason Robards and Lauren Bacall, who are two like just if you look up their like filmographies, they both have like over 100 films.
Whoa.
So yeah, like Lauren Bacall, I recognized her name, and then I recognized Jason Robards' face. But Lauren Bacall was in The Big Sleep. She was the leading lady in The Big Sleep.
I'm looking up at some of these people now. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So they play the parents. Jake Thomas plays Martin Swinton, the real son of the family. And I was like, I recognized this kid when I was watching it, and finally I was looking at his filmography and like his IMDb later on, and I was like, oh, he's the little brother in Lizzie McGuire.
Okay, that's right. Yeah.
That's why I recognize him, because that was around my time. I was in 5th grade in 2001, which is when that show started. And so that was like I was like the prime age for those Disney shows at that point. So
it's great. No, I'm just reading this lore. Apparently, he was gonna be Mowgli in the Jungle Book 2, but Haley Joel Osment was cast instead. So the rivalry continues even off screen. It seems, although I'm sure they're fine. But
the robot
one, exactly. What does this say for society?
Yeah. Jake Thomas might have won the parents, but
Haley,
the robot David won the other roles.
This is so true. Yeah.
Oh man. He's not my favorite part of the movie, but he's fine, I guess.
Yeah.
He's not near. He's like, I guess, compared when you're like holding up Jake Thomas's acting to Haley Joel Osment's, it's like that doesn't even compare.
Right. Yeah. And he's like just an obstacle, real. It's like to get. Like, I think for a while I was like, oh, I thought the film is going to be about this like intimate, contained story of sibling rivalry, and it's like, nah, we're going past this like very quickly.
Nope.
Get us to the flesh circus or whatever. That's
the flesh fair.
Yeah.
Yeah. Man. Yeah. I guess rounding out the cast, you have a bunch of voice acting. Well, you have Brendan Gleeson plays Lord
Mm.
Johnson, which I could not have $4 million told you that that was his character's
Oh
name.
no,
Um,
that's
but that is the character's name, Lord Johnson, played by Brendan
there we
Gleeson.
go.
So, and then voice acting, you have Jack Angel playing Teddy,
Mm.
which I think he did a great job. I really
Oh
enjoyed
yeah,
that performance. William Hurt as Professor Hobby, another non-voice actor.
yeah. Bless you. No,
Sorry. And then Dr. No, played by Robin Williams, very recognizable voice. Meryl Streep plays the voice of the Blue Fairy there at the end. You have Chris Rock showing up very, very briefly as the comedian mecha that's being shot out of the cannon.
Oh yeah, that's so funny.
Which I have questions about the design of that mecha. I don't know. It looks like a fake version of like what blackface would have looked like back in the day. So I was like, that's weird. Why does it look like that? So I was like, I don't know about that design, but and then rounding out like the notable ones, Ben Kingsley plays the specialist, which is like the main future being at the end.
That's why he sounded familiar. Okay. I was so like, I'm remembering
that was Ben
this.
Kingsley.
Yeah.
Yes. And he actually does the narration at the very beginning too.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure that's Ben Kingsley at the beginning and the end. That's doing like the opening and closing narration. Yeah. Which we'll talk about later because I think that plays into some like ways to read the movie. But hi, quick reminder that you can be a huge help to the production of this show. If you visit establishingshotpod.com/donate, you'll find out how to join the Establishing Shot family through some giving tiers starting as low as $5 a month. You heard that right, only $5 a month. And not only will you be helping me keep the show going, but you'll also get some perks yourself, like early and ad-free episodes, bonus episodes, access to a Discord server where we can chat it up about the show and movies in general, and more. Might even let you choose a movie for me to review for the show. Check out that link in the show notes to learn more. Back to the show. But yeah, let's talk about the production. It went from August to November in 2000, the year 2000. And they shot on 5 sound stages in WB Studios in Burbank. So the vast majority of the film was shot on sound stages, which makes sense because it's like a totally created world. The only things they did outside were they did some forest scenes in Oregon and California, and then they also did some filming, and there's like a geodesic dome beside the Queen Mary in Long Beach that I think it housed something by what's his face, the guy in the movie The Aviators about him, Howard. What's the guy's name? I can't think of it right now. But he had some sort of like big plane or something that used to be housed in that big dome, and I think they used it for something in the movie. But yeah, so really like mostly they spent their time on sound stages at Warner Brothers Studios. So, so the cinematography. Yeah. What did you think about the way this movie looked?
Yeah, it was
be interesting to hear.
Well, it's interesting to your point about the soundstage thing too, because I was listening to a podcast or just like listening to some reviews, and I was like, yeah, I could tell. I think I just appreciated the reach that this was trying to go for, like you said, like with the like I think everything when like with when in the forest, right, when David's left there, it's like, and you get to see all the other mechs, like that's just cool stuff. And I know like him trying to do that was really good. It's like it's very like uncanny valley-esque sometimes, which I think that's
Yes.
where when it doesn't look like that, it's like some of the mechs don't, but like there was that great shot. Like sometimes it looks really good. Like who's that? I'm forgetting the actress or the character, but it's like that female robot that like cares for David
Yeah, she's like the nanny bot
nanny,
kind
and
of.
like you see her face turn and you like see and
Yeah.
like stuff like that's great where I'm like, oh yeah, like it's underscoring what the film's trying to say about humanity being
Hmm.
tied with machinery. So some cool shots individually. I think like as a whole, when they're trying to like do the wide spread of stuff, I'm like, this looks kind of weird. But once again, I was like, I'm curious your thoughts
Yeah.
too, because I'm like, this might just be my old TV and Paramount Plus not having the best version of this film on the streamer. But maybe your setup
Yeah.
with the Blu-ray is a little better. But yeah,
Yeah. No, I mean, I liked the look of it. It's not like the most like stunning of Spielberg's
I would say
films
it's
as
too.
far,
There's like a
but
griminess, yeah.
it's like one of his most interesting as far as like the visuals.
Mm.
So like it's like I mean, when I think like stunning Spielberg shots, I think like, you know, Schindler's List, or um even like the way like the Indiana Jones movies look. They just look really great. Um but like this one doesn't like have any like pop out things as far as like this looks like stunning, but it also like has all the imprints of Spielberg's like framing and the way he shoots. So it like has all that, but it's just interesting. It's tons of like really interesting visuals. Um, and I think that probably comes less from like, uh, it comes from Spielberg for sure, but not so much the cinematography as like the concept art and the design. Um, but I did think the cinematography was interesting.
Oh yeah.
They had Kaminsky in some of the special features talking about his choices, because there's like in the three different acts, there's basically like three different kind of atmospheres going
Yeah.
on. And so he talked about how in the first act he was going for a more like padded and sanitized clinical look
Hmm.
in the Swinton house, which I definitely can see that. And then for like the Flesh Fair and Rouge City sequences, he's going for more like nocturnal and colorful and flashy and um, all that sort of stuff. And then you have like this intense and contrasting Manhattan and ocean floor looks, which they're especially like the ocean floor is very like intense and like a lot going on
Yeah.
under there with the kind of underwater Coney Island.
Yeah, that was
Um,
wild.
yeah, so it was interesting hearing him talk about like the way he did the lighting for the movie, um, and how he tried to like match the tones because all three acts kind of have different tones to them, and so like he tried to like match those tones with the way he lit it.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting. Um, and then um, but I mean the design is really what stands out. Like we talked about Gigolo Joe, like the costume. I thought it was interesting. The costume designer talked about how he went with like classic generic middle class clothes because it felt more timeless.
Oh yeah.
And when he said that, they were like showing, shot like little shots from the movie and people's clothes, and I was like, he's right. Like a lot of the people just kind of have like normal clothes on, and it does feel like something someone still might wear today, over 20 years
Hmm.
later. And even like the outside world, like Rouge City is still like pretty subdued. He tried not to do anything too wild or fantastical with the clothes. Um, and then, like I said, the concept art played a huge part. Rick Carter, who did the production design, was able to like take all of that concept art that Baker had made and like flesh it out for like the sets. Um, and so like when you look at the drawings of Rouge City, like he really like captures some of those drawings with the sets they made. And then even like the bridge when they're going into
Mhm.
Rouge City with the mouths open, that's like in the concept art, and it looks like just like the concept art in the way they did it in the movie. And so it played a really big part in a lot of the interesting like visual ideas came from that art that Chris Baker does. So yeah, so he might be like a big unsung hero for how interesting this movie looks for sure.
Yeah, I like that. That's a really interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I'm curious this was too because I was listening to something where that like back to the lighting a bit, like that idea of like
Hmm.
how those first scenes where David's at home, like it is supposed to be allegedly feel like you're warm and comforted, but it's almost too much, like it's oversaturated, right?
Yes.
Which I thought was an interesting
Hmm.
note. So I'm wondering if like the clothing and like it's like ideally domestic bliss or whatever, but like there's still
Yeah.
something that's like wrong with it or not quite
Hmm.
there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like it's like it looks fine, but there's something like too like clean about it. It kind of
That's
matches
over.
like
Yeah.
how it matches how David feels. Like
That's a good way of
David's
putting it.
like he looks like at first glance like, oh yeah, that's a kid. But then like you watch the way he acts and it's like something's a little off. It's a little too perfect, you know. He's a little bit too like ready to just do whatever I ask him to do, or like, you know, yeah, it's just something's a little off about
Yeah.
him. Um, but yeah, I mean, the special effects had a lot to do with like the success of the movie too. They they even had like so like on the sound stage where they built the Rouge City, they built like the first layer, like in like it was actually there. So the first layer of like buildings and stuff. But then like anything back like farther is all like added in post. So they filmed against a blue screen, um, and added all the depth and buildings in the background and stuff in post.
Okay.
And the cool thing is they had developed this like all the way back in, this seems like, oh yeah, sure, anyone can do this now, but back in 2001 this was like cutting edge.
Totally.
They had a pre-visualization system set up where they could see in the monitors in real time what was going, like what they were going to be adding in post in the background, even though it wasn't there like on set. So that was like huge for them, like probably like helped them be a lot more efficient with their shooting too.
Oh yeah.
Because they could see like, oh, here's everything going on. Like they could just like, yeah, it's really cool. And I liked this too. Spielberg's pitch to Michael Lentieri and Dennis Muren, for joining the film. He said that it would be, quote, a quest for love using all the tools that special effects offer us.
That's
unquote. And so they really like used everything, special effects
Hey, you
wise.
might
They
as
had
well,
miniatures,
while you're there.
yeah. They had miniatures, they had animatronics, they had prostheses on real people, they had blue screen, they had the CGI elements, and one thing that Spielberg really like laid into was that there should be an element of humanity in every character, no matter what the technology was. So whether it was like an animatronic or a real person or CGI, he wanted like there to be elements of humanity in it.
What a concept
kind
to
of-
think about nowadays, you
Yeah.
know, with like the AI
Right.
stuff and everything. But yeah, no, it's so true.
Yes. And Lantieri was really like in his interviews, he was talking about how he's worked with Spielberg a good bit, and so he kind of just like does his work and then he shows it to Spielberg, and Spielberg would be like, yeah, keep going in that direction, or no, like go in this direction. And it's like similar to kind of how Kaminsky talked about, like, we don't really have to talk a whole lot about what we want it to look like anymore. Lantieri felt the same way, and he said also that he always felt like his work with Spielberg all of it ends up on the screen. So like he feels like he's not wasting any of his work too. Um, yeah, you were talking about the robots, and I think that's really interesting. Kubrick had the idea to design them according to function,
Yeah.
and so Spielberg kind of like stuck with that. So like you do see like a variety of different kinds of robots and mechas, and that's because they're supposed to be like designed according to what function they play. And so, I guess like Gigolo Joe is supposed to be like a lover, and
Right.
so he's very smooth
Right.
and
That
like
kind of fluid element there. Yeah.
elegant and quippy and knows the right thing to say at the right time, sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, you have a ton of. What was your favorite robot? Do you have a favorite?
Well, I do, I will say, despite all the things I'm saying about like Jude's character being like a little like weird to see, what was the one that was, this is so sad, but it's like the one that was like being strung up and then like
Yeah, I like that one too.
I felt so bad, but I'm like, that was kind of a cool design. I'm not gonna lie, but
yeah,
R.I.P.
Yeah, and
respect to like Comey. He got destroyed, but yeah. But I'm happy you liked it too. I was like, is this weird if I'm like this thing that like gets destroyed real soon? But yeah.
Yeah, and I liked the one too that was like kind of had this like hologram face kind of thing going on. That was kind of cool too.
While you do, I'm just gonna look up mechs and AI just so I can get a better visual. But keep going. Yeah.
Yeah, they had a ton of them.
And you're saying this was in the concept art too, like what you're talking about when they were like making.
Yeah,
it?
not all of them. Like, but some of them, some of them were in the concept art. Some of them they kind of like Spielberg just kind of let them kind of have fun and use their imaginations, and they even made one that like looked like Stan Winston, who was the animatronics guy. That's fun.
I am seeing the hologram one. That's a cool design too. Actually, I do like anything that's like a little more lanky or spindly.
Yeah, he doesn't look real like a human at all.
And I think those. Yeah, it's funny. I mean, we were talking off pod before about. I saw Nightmare Before Christmas recently, and I know you had the Jack Skeleton shirt, so maybe I just have an affinity for the long, spindly, slender man looking robots now. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Shout out to Jack Skellington. He's the man.
He is the man.
He's the man with the plan, the Pumpkin King.
Exactly.
Yeah, I really, the robots are really interesting. You talked about the nanny one and how like she turns to the side and like,
you see the
you see the stuff. They use like basically like a blue screen. She just like was wearing like a blue wrap around that part of her face.
Really?
And so,
okay, that's interesting. And that makes sense. I was wondering how they did that,
It's really cutting edge because that's stuff they still do now.
Totally.
Is like, people will wear green suits or like wear parts of them that are green, and then they'll add in that stuff CGI and post. And that's what they did with a lot of the robots in this movie was, she had like basically blue screen, like fabric wrap around that part of her head, except for like the part of her face that was like actually supposed to show. And then, they just added that in post. Like, Mirren even talked about like how it was like pretty tedious process to like get the lighting and shadows right in the CGI.
It was well done, I will say. Yeah, that makes sense. And that's tough to do. Yeah, right.
And one of the other things I thought was really cool was they actually hired on a lot of amputees.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
To play so they're the one that I remember seeing in the in both, like I remember seeing it when I watched it, and also like in the special features, one of the ones they showed was when all the mechas are like coming to the little dump where they've dumped all the parts. You have the one guy that's like trying to put on an arm, and then there's another one that
Yeah.
comes up and it has like a welding tool on its
Yeah.
arm. That was a guy that was an amputee, and they had like made that little welding piece to like be attached to
his arm.
that was
Interesting.
cut off. Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, and so which makes sense because who would know how to like function with a part of you that's not actually like a part of your body better
That's
than
someone who doesn't.
a
Yeah.
person that's an
That's an point.
amputee. Which I thought, so you get some amputee representation in this movie, which is, you know, you don't hear of that very often.
Well,
but
see,
it's
it's
in
like
there.
what you said. It's like every time Spielberg does that, then he has the robot that looks like it is a questionable depiction of, like you said, a blackface character. So you're like, can we have
Yeah.
some more? Can we be consistent in
Yeah.
your representation here? Which is good. But yeah.
Yeah, maybe that was just my reading of it, but
Yeah. No, you're good.
but yeah, I mean, there's even like there's some sequences where you have like a bunch of robots like in one shot, and like when they're all in the cage, there's like 20 or so robots in there, and they're all I think I remember there was like 40 something puppeteers or like, you know, people running the controls for all of those robots to make sure that because when you're getting
crazy.
like a shot of all of them, they all have to be functioning and like moving around, and so it really takes a lot of coordination to have all those puppeteers puppeteering all of those animatronics to make it look good.
Yeah,
you know,
no,
on
really.
screen.
And like it just speaks to like the decision to focus on those scenes and to make them feel like characters. Like, you know, to
Right.
Like, I think the fact that we get so many elongated moments with them is like to underscore that sense of like compassion to feel. You know, they're not like extras.
Yeah.
We get moments. It's like, oh, like you said, these are like full scenes with people or with
Yeah.
the AI. Yeah.
Yeah, and it feels like it's one of those things that Spielberg does really well is like when he's like on top of his game, he's really good at like super efficient character development. And there are like a couple of those mechas in that cage where you feel like, oh, you know, I would like to see that character actually fleshed out more.
Right.
Like what's their background, and like it takes like someone like Spielberg to like take, you know, 30 seconds on screen and get you interested in a character. But yeah, the star of all the animatronics though, of course, was Teddy.
Without a doubt. Freaked me out
Teddy's
when he first
the MVP.
talked, but grew to love the guy by the end. But yeah.
Yeah. He's like, he might be my favorite in the movie. He's just walking around like, where's David?
I know.
Have you seen David? Are you taking me to David?
We love someone who's focused on a mission, you know?
He's laser focused. Like, he's like, oh, we're sitting here for 2,000 years staring at a statue. Like, I'm by your side,
I think
bro.
that's
like,
so funny. It's like that's a crazy amount of time. Yeah. Is that true?
Oh man. Yeah. Teddy, he's the real MVP of this movie. But yeah, he is a blend of animatronic and CGI. Of course, just like in Jurassic Park with the dinosaurs, they try to do as much real animatronic work on screen as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And usually the CGI is just like if Teddy's like running, which the puppets couldn't really do that smoothly, then they would like CGI that. But most of it is the animatronic Teddy. And you know, they looked at some animated bears like Pooh Bear and stuff to kind of get ideas for how he would move. So that's pretty cool.
Hey, next Halloween you have a new bear costume idea for the kiddos, you know?
Yes.
It's great.
Dress him up as Teddy. Or maybe I'll be Teddy because I can do the voice.
See, there we go. Exactly. That's how you trick or treat.
You gotta have the deep, calm voice.
When you ask for your candy, that's exactly right. Yeah. But that's fair.
Trick or treat. I'm getting candy for David.
It always has to tie back to David somehow to honor the spirit of the character. So yeah.
Oh man. Yeah, a lot of different. So they had a lot of different like versions of Teddy too. Like there was one where like he was rigged and attached like to somebody puppeteering him, like attached to their feet. So when they were walking, he was walking. So that was kind of cool. They had like different heads for different Teddy moods that they would switch out. Like I said earlier, they had a carryable Teddy that had more minimal movements. And yeah, Teddy, this is crazy. One of the producers said that Teddy worked every day of a 76-day shoot, which is like unheard of for like an animatronic character.
Oh, to work them.
To like actually be on set working every day of a production
And being carried, like you said, by Haley for like multiple scenes.
Yeah. And they had Jack Angel, who did the voice, on set because they were constantly having to like redo vocals because, you know, the context of the scene calls for like him to say something in a different intonation or something like that. So yeah, he was on set a good bit too. Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of stuff with the production, like the underwater stuff, like that was really cool. They shot all that in miniature, and they did this thing called dry as wet cinematography. So it's basically like giving the illusion that you're underwater, but it's actually not underwater. So they filled the room with smoke and got the lighting just right so that those, and you know, and it's shot in miniature. So these are like miniature models that they're shooting for this like underwater Coney Island Pinocchio, you know, theme park thing. But yeah, it was just not underwater. It was just in a room lit well with smoke, a lot of smoke in it.
Whoa.
To make it, and it looks like it's underwater.
That's once again the movie magic there, and like
movie magic.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and then they would add the like amphibicopter in post.
That's right.
Props to the name for that thing, amphibicopter. Like that's great. A great name for
once
a
again. It's right. So you get character development with just the name. It's just right to the point.
Oh yeah. And then, yeah, you get more miniatures too with the Manhattan section. The buildings, like especially like the main building, is like a scaled miniature, and then they have some like CGI and matte backgrounds, and then the water is CGI'd. With the water looks pretty good for CGI water, I think. Yeah, and then the like amphibicopter there is CGI'd some, like when you see it flying around. Yeah. But then they also do some like live action stuff with blue screen for the amphibicopter for Manhattan. But yeah, the like the main building that they end up going in with the, you know, lion waterfalls was like a I think he said it was like a miniature that was like 6 foot, like around 6 foot tall, of that building. So pretty cool. Yeah, a lot of, I'll just run through these like miscellaneous fun facts about
please. They look great.
So they took plaster casts of Osment for all the Davids. So he had to spend a day like getting plaster casts done of him, which he talked about being a very strange experience. They one thing that I thought was cool, just like movie magic, was there was like they made this trick table for the surgery scene. So, you know, he's got all the spinach up in his electronic parts, and he's like under, the rest of his body is under the table, and it's just his head sticking out through a hole.
So it's like but they have
like it's like a trick table.
Fascinating.
Movie magic.
It's so funny. It really is like about illusion and making you think about one thing.
It looks great. You know,
good.
It looks, yeah. The Flesh Fair cannon was done live action. Lantieri like went to Spielberg and he was like, I know we could probably like CGI this, but let's actually like shoot this animatronic through a fan blades and have it explode.
Why not? You know?
So they did. They videoed Robin Williams to get inspiration for movements for Dr. No while he was doing his vocal recording. So that's fun. the Rouge City amphibicopter had the set was like built around a track. So it was actually, it looks like it's like uncontrollably like flailing around the city streets, but it's actually on a track, very controlled. And then of course at this point, they're able in post to like digitally like erase like the track and the base that's holding it up. So just like 10 years ago, that wouldn't have really been possible. And now it is in 2001. So yeah. And then the other like interesting thing was they went through 8 tons of real ice per day on the excavation set. So where they're, pulling David out of the ice.
Yeah.
8
they
tons wanted
a
to have
day.
8 tons a day. That's what they said. Yeah, and
that's why the
so they would
ice
like
caps have melted. It's because they were doing this movie.
They've stolen
all of it to make this movie. I hope you're proud of yourself, Spielberg. No,
that's why Manhattan's underwater.
Exactly that's yeah. But I mean, I was gonna say like how they got that like that excavation because you're dealing with like water, snow, things are breaking. So that's
there's some really really good shots in that, and I think it really like pays off like to have real ice, and they would bring it on and get all the ice like 3 hours before shooting, so that by the time they were shooting, it was kind of all melty and wet. And like I think it looks really good. Like there's the shot of like looking through the windshield of the vehicle at David as like the water's like melting over it. Like looks really good.
Like that,
and then I mean a lot of the things that are the most CGI'd were the like future beings at the end. Which are interesting. Like they're like long spindly dudes too. And it said they were based on like ballet dancers and they were going for like actors that have like a quiet presence. And yeah, they had to do like in the design, like in the way they designed their movements, they had to rely on pantomime because the things don't really have a face to like be expressive. So they have to like be expressive with their bodies. But yeah, the Blue Fairy, they talked about being like one of the hardest things because of the lighting and how she's supposed to look like both real and like fantastical.
Right, like a figurine, like that fairy tale element.
I think out of all the things in the movie, that looks the worst to me.
Fair enough.
Like I get what they were going for, but I'm like, this looks, I don't know, it's off-putting. Maybe it's supposed to be.
Well, it's like when it tried to move, like I think when it's like static or a statue, that's one thing. But it's like when you're trying to have it like interact with like, as you said, like real people, it's just like, well, this isn't quite working in the best way. But
and I think they did like try to make her look like the statue did. But yeah, and it's these like future beings that have made this like replica of the statue, they have the statue as a reference point. So I guess maybe she does look kind of like the statue and that's why she looks like that. I guess that's a good excuse, but but yeah. And then, Michael Lantieri again, in the special features said that not one effect in that movie isn't cutting edge. And I can totally see that. Like, they're really like utilizing every possible like special effect they can.
Well, and it's like you said with the ending, which I'm sure I know we'll get into the plot later, but it's just like thinking about how the film, like I definitely thought when I was watching it, it ends with him he just starts praying and it ends like, do we know what happens or not? But like the fact that they made that whole other sequence, right? With like, they had those, which I know is a Kubrick thing, not Spielberg, even though people might think it's more of it gives more Spielberg. It just speaks to like, they like were pushing the boundaries narratively and like you said with the visuals too that were there.
Yeah, and the technology too.
To make that happen. Yeah, that was there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I have some stuff about the sound too. Rydstrom usually you bring the sound guys in late into the production, but Rydstrom was brought on like before they even started shooting, so he was able to play with a lot of sounds kind of throughout the
Yeah.
movie, getting robotic sounds, and he talked about trying to record some like tonal and musical sounds. Like he played this kind of played on like his keyboards this kids choir that ended up being the sound of like the amphibicopter when it's like passing by underwater, this like musical tonal sound instead of like an electronic one. So that was all interesting. But then and then the score too for John Williams, it's a really like kind of a interesting score for John Williams, because just like the lighting and the atmosphere for each act is different, the music kind of changes for each act as well. And in fact, John Williams said that the score is very schizophrenic.
He said his words. Well, at least he said it first. You know, that's there.
Yeah. He said you have like very like tonal melodies with strings at the beginning, and then there's like a bunch of like atonal stuff throughout, and then you end with like this calm piano score, and it's just like it even has like electronic music way more than a typical John Williams score. It's a lot going on. They did include this Strauss piece that Kubrick had specifically requested.
Okay, so they got that.
And I think he worked it in over the top of the score when they're going into Rouge City through the mouths of the bridge mouths, I guess, whatever those things are. You kind of hear the Strauss piece. So that was cool that they kind of honored Kubrick's wish to get that piece in there. But yeah, that's really it. The finished the production. Like I said earlier, it was a 76-day shoot, so they really knocked it out like pretty efficiently, I think. Way more efficient than Kubrick would have been.
Oh, totally with it. Well, it's like even with the what is it? It's just interesting to think about them doing this project and like keeping it productive while wanting to honor him too, you know, and like what's this idea when you're like working through your own grief and sadness. And I like how you had mentioned there's like a lot of emotions here where like he's trying to like, I can do it. I wonder if there's like I can make a Kubrick film and like faster than him too, you know, in like a funny joking way of like competition and stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. And two, just like making it like being true to like what he wanted with the story, but also like making it your own too, takes a lot of work, for sure.
Hello again. Do you know how you can really support the show for free in just a few minutes or less? That's right. Just leave a rating and review on Spotify and Apple, or wherever you listen that might allow for ratings and reviews. These really help the visibility of the podcast. In fact, just hit that pause button right now and drop the review right now. And then you can get back to the show. I'd greatly appreciate it. Okay. I trust that you went and left that rating and review now. Back to the show.
So they did obviously a lot of post-production work. They finished filming, when did I say? I'm scrolling back up. So they finished in November of 2000, and it didn't release until June of the next year. So they had plenty of time that they used to kind of get the, post-production CGI stuff right. One of the things that kind of worked against the movie was the marketing really played into the mystery of the movie. Like, it's like one of those, like the trailers like made it very like you didn't really know what the movie was going to be. They were kind of relying on like it being a Kubrick Spielberg piece, like and using that, like they were just like, oh, this is going to be successful because it's a Spielberg movie that Kubrick was developing.
Oh, so they were just using the names in that sense, just like
Yeah.
no brainer, like it's the thing. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So yeah, they were just like, oh yeah, this is going to hit, but like it kind of like backfired, which we'll talk about in a
Yeah.
second, because the critics were kind of confused. They were either like saying it had Kubrick's like pessimism and opposing that, or they were opposing like Spielberg's sentimentality
Right,
or
yeah.
whatever. So they just didn't, because like they didn't know what they were getting into. It maybe backfired a little bit with the mysterious marketing, but yeah, it released June 29th, 2001.
Great.
The American public didn't give it the expected triumph. It only earned 78 million domestic,
Ooh.
and went on to earn 236 million worldwide. So it did make back its $100 million budget, but yeah, it was expected to be way bigger.
Oh, I mean, when
that.
you have these guys linking together
Yeah.
for this, I mean,
for a sci-fi movie.
oh yeah,
you know,
it's like
a summer sci-fi blockbuster kind of.
I think about
yeah.
like it's not like they both have done that before. Spielberg sci-fi,
Right.
Kubrick obviously 2001, and it's like that marriage, like what you're saying of like commercial sensibility with more, you know, like it's just like, oh, like this could work, and yeah, so it makes sense why you think it would do that. But
yeah, and I think a lot of people just really were confused by the movie. I think a lot of people just didn't know what to do with it, and yeah, I mean, also a lot of the articles that were written like in the reception were focused on the kind of differentiation between Spielberg and Kubrick. So they would, and a lot of them blamed Spielberg, of course, for this sentimentalizing
of it. Yeah.
But as we know now, that was most of that stuff was from Kubrick.
Right.
You know, Spielberg said the whole last 20 minutes of the movie was completely Stanley's, and then the whole first 35 to 40 minutes of the film, all the stuff in the house was word for word from Stanley's screenplay.
That's what's like so funny to think of, like he's getting all the flack for like, this is what you did. He's like, my guy, this was the person.
This was not me.
Yeah.
This was blame it on
yeah. Oh, and it's
blame
like
it
I
on
could
Stanley,
change it, but like it's like it would actually be.
But yeah, he's being true to
what his friend wanted and everything. So
yeah, and then the Flesh Fair was kind of like a later addition. It wasn't even in Kubrick's first script, and so he really had to like I guess pun semi-intended flesh that out a good bit. I already mentioned he had to flesh out the Gigolo Joe character a good bit. And then like when you really think about it, like he's evoking a lot of like his past work with some of the darker stuff. Like you have these round images of roundups and mass graves that kind of evoke the Shoah that he depicted in Schindler's List. You have these like Gothic futuristic circuses with cages that evoke the slavery he depicted in Amistad. And so like he does have like some darker imagery that he's done in his filmography at this point, and he's pulling from that. So it's not like the darker stuff is Kubrick and the lighter stuff is Spielberg's. Like, no, Spielberg's made some dark stuff at this point too that he has experience making. So yeah, I have these couple of quotes from some writing at the time. Peter Bradshaw in The Guardian at the time wrote, AI winds I think I had a typo.
No,
sorry. I was like, that does not make sense. So Bradshaw in Guardian says, quote, AI winds up with Kubrick's empathy and Spielberg's intellectual muscle. It is a lethal combination, unquote. Which, I wrote that and I was like, oh, so this guy liked it. But on second thought, I was like, wait, does he mean lethal like in a good way or a bad way?
It could go either way.
I think he means it in a good way, because there's this other opinion by Didier Perron from Liberation, French a French
Yeah.
publication that said, quote, Spielberg bogs down Kubrick's project in his humanist mush, unquote. So again, kind of there was a big misunderstanding, I think, from the critics, especially
Mm.
of like who was responsible for what in the movie between Spielberg and Kubrick. And it really got judged based on that instead of just being like judged on its own merit of what it
Interesting.
was.
Yeah.
Um,
Mi-
and I really think that Spielberg Kubrick kind of like question of like, is it more
Or
Spielberg or
more Kubrick.
Kubrick, like really worked against the success of the
Is that
film
something
for
you were
sure.
thinking of? Because I'll admit I did fall into that, knowing like the bit of research I
Yeah,
had. I was, I mean, it didn't completely take over my viewing, but I was like, I'm not gonna
You
lie, I was
know,
thinking about it.
yeah, I think going in, I had already heard that like that was like a misunderstanding of like who was responsible for what. And so I really, and then, I always have like a like Spielberg glasses on when I'm watching
Of
these
course.
movies going through this filmography. And so like I'm like just laser focused in on, oh, that's Spielberg, oh, that's Spielberg. So like I wasn't really thinking a whole lot about Kubrick when I was watching the movie. I was just thinking about Spielberg.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't think it really affected too much like my viewing, but yeah, how do you think it affected yours when you were watching?
I think I was just trying to think, like, there's always an inherent, maybe this is unfair. I'm happy you asked this, like cynicism I ascribe to Kubrick's work, and I think like
Yes.
it's like those elements where I would expect a Spielberg movie to go left, but Kubrick's influence went right. Like I think about that scene where he meets his counterpart for the first time in the office, and like that's such like a scary and sad moment, where he's like,
Yeah.
have I made it home? And it's like, I guess and once again, it's not like Spielberg doesn't know how to deal with darkness, but like I would think in a moment like that, it's like, oh, is this like a Spielberg is this a Kubrick choice to be like, actually,
Yeah.
you traveled all this way for nothing, and guess what? You're not special after all. You're just like, what's that line William Hurt said? He's like, you're the first of your kind, and like that's just like such a gutting, like, you're actually not special, kid. Like, I don't know. It's just like, I don't know. It's like, and I think it's stuff like that where I'm like, oh wow, this feels pretty cynical, and there isn't a lot of hope, maybe. But once again, I don't want to fall into the binary of like Kubrick evil and dark and Spielberg joyful and happy. But think of the commerciality of it, I guess. Especially after after 1973 or whatever. Like, maybe it's wants to be more mindful about what he's doing.
Yeah. After making a 1971.
Oh, 1971.
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, what's cool and interesting about this lens that obviously everyone at the time and everyone since kind of watches this movie through is that it speaks a lot to like the endeavor of this show of like, okay, let's watch through a director's filmography, let's tune into like what they're about, what themes they explore, how they like put that onto screen with their visuals, and like this is like, most people though don't watch movies with that in mind, but for some reason this one like really like stood out as a movie where people were actually watching it thinking about who made it and who was involved with making it, and it affected like the way they read the film, which is interesting. It just goes to show that it is important who makes a film. So it kind of like validates my endeavor with this this podcast. So I think I really liked this quote too from Steph. I don't know if it's Stephanie Delorme. It's French, so I don't know how to say her name, but she wrote in a French publication kind of talking about how it relied on Spielberg's like poetic emotional force and Kubrick's conceptual analytical kind of filmmaking.
Yeah, the philosophical.
Like the combination of those two things. But she says that, and we'll, this is going to be like a preview of like how we end our conversation by talking about the ending of the movie. But she said, quote, Spielberg reaches what only we would never have dared to face, the morbid truth of his cinema, regression to the point of nausea, which suddenly, by an excess of candor and sadness, is brutally affecting, as a Spielberg film had never before been so affecting. And then she went on to say, AI ends with a stunning image, a small child in the bed of his dead mother, two corpses side by side for eternity, two remnants of humanity, a robot and a fantasy.
Wow.
And yeah, I was just like,
that's tough.
Yeah, so it is interesting because what her kind of take on this is like, this is really like Spielberg reaching a point in his career where he's able to like kind of deconstruct all of his career leading up to this point. Because I mean, what she's basically like pointing out is this movie ends with Spielberg saying like, these childhood fantasies that I've like made my career off of are like in the end kind of like empty.
That's great. Yeah.
Which I don't know if he was thinking about that when he was making it, but like it's an interesting analysis for sure. And then this other quote I have from Richard Schickel, who says, quote, the film needs Spielberg's warmth in order not to be intolerably cruel.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's very true. And it's true, but it also like might work against like people and how they read the ending of the movie. But this has been reconsidered for its value, which is like this ode to like the virtues of belief and imagination, but like with a shroud over it, because it was ultimately about like the death of humanity in a way. I think people have reconsidered it in more recent times.
Well, I was gonna say, like, I don't know if, as you think about AI now, which I know is like such a big conversation, like I don't even know where, like, if this is being revisited or recontextualized in like a more, or for you,
I think a lot of people are. So I had never actually seen, this was my first time seeing the movie. So I had never seen it, so I didn't really know what to expect going in, but I had heard like, oh, the ending is like overly sentimental, and so when I watched it, you know what, I'm gonna pause on that because I want to talk about the ending like all at once.
Yeah, no, that sounds
to
good.
end the conversation. Because I think it's a great way. I think talking about the ending and the way this end is actually like a really great way to kind of like close out the conversation.
For sure,
so I'm gonna share that thought for later. Save that thought for later. It did. So this movie did get 2 Oscar nominations for the score and for the visual effects. It didn't win either of them. It just got those 2
nods.
Which, you know, I think those are well deserving. I'm surprised it didn't get like any like makeup or costume nominations though. I feel like it was like a prime movie for that sort of nomination, but you know, it didn't. But yeah, let's move on to like really digging into this movie. We've kind of like touched all around the themes and whatnot, but let's dig into it, and let's start with some quibbles. Because I get the feeling that you have some quibbles, and I'm interested to hear what they are.
Well, I mean, to the earlier point about the noms, I feel like That is interesting. You would think the animatron. I mean, especially knowing how all the animatronic stuff was happening. I'm like, you'd think there would be. Well, I mean, I guess I don't know what came out the years before. So maybe
Yeah,
what won the
I don't know.
Oscars.
I'm not sure
Maybe what
either.
won the Oscars were deserving and worthy. Yeah. I mean, I quibbles wise, I think. Honestly, nothing. It's just interesting, and this is something I always have to think about. Where like I'm viewing this, having seen a lot of other AI type
Yeah,
movies, which we'll get to, later in terms of our
next
draft.
week.
But it's
Yeah.
just like I feel like the part of me was just like, oh, like what's new that's being said here, and like it
Hmm.
just feels like a trite conversation, I guess, in some ways. But I
Yeah.
really did though, like. I will say it's funny you bring up fairy tale because I'm trying to think about how I feel about Pinocchio playing such a role in like the story
Yeah.
as a whole. I just wasn't expecting that, I think. So that's
Hmm.
just an element of like, is that almost like too simplistic of a parallel? Like toy wants to
Mm.
become a boy, but this time it's the AI or the mech who wants to become a boy. So how
Yeah.
well, but I don't know. Thinking about the fairy tale stuff, I'm still kind of chewing on that, but I know you also have
Yeah.
some thoughts there too about that structure and stuff. But
Yeah. I mean, the it is interesting. Like the fairy tale stuff is definitely like all through. Like this movie almost feels like more of a fairy tale
mm,
fantasy kind of movie with like sci-fi trappings, I guess. It feels more like that than like a full-on sci-fi movie, you know.
that's
Um,
a good way of
it's
putting it,
more
actually. Yeah,
it's more sci-fi than like Star Wars
yeah,
is. Star Wars is really just like a fantasy movie.
yeah, yeah,
Um, but it's set in space, so like people say it's sci-fi, and I'm like, yeah, it it has like a sci-fi setting, but it's not really a sci-fi
yeah,
movie.
yeah. But this you're
Like it's
saying
not.
is like,
This is like it really is a mix, I
yeah,
think,
that's
of
a good. I never thought
because
about
it,
that. Yeah, like as a blend of those two worlds or genres. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it's yeah. Now that I'm thinking about it, it really is like a good mix because, like I said, like Star Wars, I always say like that's a fantasy movie with a sci-fi setting. Um, but you could also have like, uh, yeah, so this could easily be like that sort of thing, but it is interested enough in those kind of like sci-fi
That's right. That's right.
philosophical ideas that it still feels like enough sci-fi where you can say like, oh yeah, it's a good blend of fairy tale and sci-fi ideas, for sure. Uh, but yeah, and you know, it's drawing from a lot of like universal myths. You know, you have like biblical episodes like Cain and
Hmm.
Abel and the flood. You have like fairy tale influences like Goldilocks and Sleeping
Yeah,
Beauty and Pinocchio,
that's right.
obviously, and um, the you know, you have the whole conversation with Dr. No about like combining fact with fairy
Hmm.
tale, and you know his tricky. I love that Dr. No is like basically just a computer, uh, that is with the veil of trying to help you, but actually is just like trying to trick you into getting more money
I
out
know,
of
right?
you.
Yeah. It's like you have to adjust your tone of voice too, which is a
Yeah.
great touch. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
like
it's
so.
a great little concept to like show how ridiculous, you know, our, you know, the way we may try to make money off of
Oh
people
yeah,
is.
totally. And it's all, you're tricked because of Robin Williams' voice, and his
Yeah.
affable personality. So yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that is true. That's really good casting with that in mind for sure.
Yeah.
Um,
Very genie, Aladdin-esque, I
yep,
guess is
it
an
is.
easy
Mhm.
comparison there. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Um, yeah, I mean quibbles like, uh, I don't have a ton of like like the only quibble that I would say is like there's not ever like a clear sense of like the rules of this world. Um, but I'm not that didn't really like take away from my viewing experience. Like I didn't have to understand why some mechas act this way and some act another. It's just kind of like something you accept as part of the world and go along with it.
Yeah.
But I have heard like some people like that were getting stuck on that. And then another thing I saw like some people complaining about was like the tonal discrepancies, which it definitely has different tones in the different acts, but I kind of saw that more as a strength than a weakness. Like it adds to like the different episodes of the fairy tale. Like, you know, in this act, it has this tone because that's like what it's trying to explore, like the kind of creepiness of David and how he feels off. And then, you know, the middle part kind of feels more like a fairy tale, like adventure. In a way, it's like kind of, it's dark and colorful at the same time. And, you know, he kind of is going from one place to another. So I don't know. I don't think the tonal discrepancies are that big of a deal. They kind of make sense to me.
You know, well, really quickly back to the world building part. This is just like a funny side point because this is something that's always irked me. Like, I don't like watching things like what is it? Like the Alien movies where you have like the synthetics or Blade Runner. The whole like seeing robots eat, I'm like, how do they process that? You know, and I just it's like to what you made about the spinach earlier, where I was like, I just for me it was just like a fun geeky moment. I wrote in my notes from like, see, when robots try to eat, it messes up their system. So I mean, maybe the synthetics of the Alien universe or Blade Runner have advanced inner systems to process food. I don't know how that would even work, but that was just something selfish that I love when you're talking about fleshing out a world and the things that are there. So even if other stuff isn't fleshed out, I love that they address that where they can't eat. Otherwise,
that specific thing is addressed.
But I hear you on the other things that aren't super clear. So just one word.
I kind of love that you were so honed in on the spinach thing, like, and that made you so happy that it really messed him up.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I was like, see, finally, and it's like liquid too. I'm like, it's not going to work well with the servos, you know?
Yeah. Oh yeah. But to be fair, you know, old Martin over there eating just as much spinach, like he might have had some messed up insides too.
They gotta open him up too to make sure they clean out the organs, make sure it's okay. That's right. Yeah.
Oh man. I always too like to talk about like Spielberg distinctives. You know, he has some like distinctive looks that he goes for. There's a ton of silhouettes in this movie that look great. The main one that comes to mind, of course, is like Joe up against the moon, which turns out not to be a moon, but the little like hot air balloon kind of thing, which I thought was really cool, because they're like, the mechas are like, it's the moon, and they start running, and then you find out, oh, it's because they have this like this vehicle that they chase rogue mechas down, and that looks like the moon.
So they have this dark association with the moon or something.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. A lot of mirrors and mirror images in this movie too. Low angle close ups. Spielberg loves a good low angle close up.
Wait, can you point to an example of that in the film? I think I know what a low angle close up is, but I'm trying to think about one that stood out to you. Or
I mean, there's actually like multiple of Gigolo Joe, like where it's basically like this thing Spielberg does, like I know there's some of Gigolo Joe. I can't think of a specific moment. You can, you know, I guess like jumping back to earlier films, like you think about like Indiana Jones, there'll be these moments where like the camera like pushes in and it's like looking up at him with the sky,
right? But it's like
as the background, and it's a close up, but it's like a low angle close up.
That's great.
And there's some of those of Gigolo Joe. I just can't think of like the specific moments they happen.
I know.
Just kind of
I'm
like
seeing some examples and
jot in my
that
note.
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
That's great. That's
Yeah,
great.
and so yeah, he does a lot of that. I talked about the character building efficiency. You really like get a feel for the mother-father dynamic in this movie really quickly. The montage of David's creepiness around the house, like, immediately like gets you in the right headspace for what's going on. I really love Gigolo Joe's introduction. I feel like you kind of get his character pretty quickly. Like, you're like, oh, okay, this is what this guy is.
Yeah, exactly. You know what he's about really fast. Yeah.
Yeah. What about like intriguing images? Did you have any like images that stuck out other than the spinach?
I know, right? Yeah. Man, I mean, even it's like what you were saying. I feel like those ending scenes, like I think like underwater. I think just like the way Spielberg renders like the world and like it's like images I'd expect to see, but still be very haunting. Like when you think about the flood, I was like,
Yeah.
I'm probably gonna see the Statue of Liberty somewhere here, and I do, but like, oh, I don't know, just like. It's just wild for me to think about. Like, I think maybe it's like me reading in with the modern lens of like the hurricanes and things that have been affecting people right now in the States. So,
Yeah.
the way depicting the destruction of the natural world, but like once again, just like a lot of the way things are really well lived into. Like I'm thinking about the Mecca dump pile, and everything that's there, like all that.
We're still dumping stuff.
Yeah, no, literally,
for us.
it's like even in the past, right? Like it's all there. Even the opening with like that female mech that like opens. I don't know, just like stuff like that. And like the fact that that's all taking place in like a very uptight like boardroom type meeting, but it's like you're dealing with the fallout of humanity there too. So lots of those juxtapositions I thought were really good.
Yeah, and it's the kind of like the rising waters is kind of like a subtext in the movie. They don't ever really talk about it, but there's imagery there of like the Manhattan underwater basically. And one like image that's like is unintentionally haunting is way in the future when Manhattan is underwater, there will still be these remnants of the Twin Towers.
Oh yeah.
And like, but like humanity is so like, humanity is capable of so much more destruction than even for those towers to still be there.
That's wild. I didn't even think about that. That's a good point.
And I think they wanted Spielberg to like, let them like take it out for like releasing it on video or whatever. And he wouldn't remove it. But yeah, it's funny because I'm literally drinking tea out of my One World Observatory mug from New York. They've got the new World Trade Center buildings that they've built there now. And one of them I would actually like, this is really random, but it's like really cool if you're ever in New York to do the observatory at the One World Trade Center.
Oh, I want to check it out. Yeah.
It's incredible. Okay. Like you can see on a clear day, you can like literally see the curvature of the earth. You're so high.
That's snap. Okay.
Yeah. And you can see like the whole city. It's really, really cool.
Okay.
But yeah, that's definitely like an unintentional haunting image. Because this released in June.
Yep, I was just looking it up.
And then September, of course, 2001, they fall, and so like, yeah, this is releasing probably. I don't know what the turnaround was back in 2001, but it's probably releasing on like DVD.
Yeah,
probably early than 2002, and Spielberg's like, no, we're leaving those in there. Like it's part of the kind of the haunting imagery now, I guess.
It's interesting because I'm looking at this and it's just like, it's funny to think about these movies. Like there's a list of movies that had these that weren't edited. So you have AI, artificial intelligence next to like, what is it? Donnie Darko, Vanilla Sky, and Rush Hour 2. So it's just like, what do all these things have in common? It's like, well, they feature the World Trade Center, but they didn't edit them for their final. for their final version on DVD.
That's a good trivia question.
Literally, yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I guess what Very Muppet Christmas Movie is saying it's here too. So
Okay.
who knows? But yeah,
I'm gonna stow those away for a future like film
you
trivia
should. That's a
night.
Thanks for mentioning. I didn't even think about the like. I guess like when I think
Yeah.
about movies released in 2001, it's like and 2002, I guess too, and after it's just like we're thinking about. But yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I have like a little list of like really intriguing images. Like there's
Yeah.
this part where David is kind of familiarizing himself with the house and he's looking at the pictures of them as a family.
Yeah.
And there's this one where he like stops and he's looking at a picture of, the mom and dad and the son, and his reflection is in the picture too. And so it's just one of those like really like smart, like visual, it's like saying so much visually, and like really well shot and framed and everything, that Spielberg's so good at. One of the big like images that I thought was like so good was when she like puts him in his room and then closes the door.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
he looks at her and it's like that fragmented glass makes him like look so creepy.
Yeah.
Through it.
Forgot about that.
Like that was a great image. More like adding to his creepiness, like him laughing. It was like
without
really
blinking
weird.
this whole time. I have to remember that.
Yeah.
He didn't blink.
Oh yeah. There's the image of him like after he's fallen into the pool with Martin. There's like that image of him just like drifting at the bottom of the pool. And I think it was Molly Haskell in her book about Spielberg that I'm listening to. She had brought up that image and was like asking what's more damaging for David, the water damage or like being neglected by your parents as you're like drifting at the bottom of a pool. And I was like, ooh, that's good.
That's biting. Yeah.
Yeah. We've mentioned the mecha dump pile. I think was a great image. There's this like recurring image. I'm not sure how often it recurs, but there's definitely like this part. I mentioned him laughing. So there's that dinner sequence, his like first dinner, where he's sitting there and they're eating, and it does this shot like through the ceiling light, where it almost looks like the ceiling light it's like circular and it's over his head, and it kind of looks like a halo over this like perfect child. But then there's this juxtaposed image of when he meets his when he meets himself in Manhattan and starts smashing himself and yelling, "I'm David." There's this like oblong shape that's like similar, but it's like broken in half.
Oh, interesting.
And it's like it's almost like this juxtaposition of here he is like in his perfect robot, child state, and now after like being with humanity, he's like taken on humanity's kind of destructive tendencies, and that now the halo is like broken.
Interesting. I like that reading.
Yeah,
like a fall from grace sort of element too.
Yeah, and it's like it's done with just this subtle imagery that you really have to be looking to see it. There's a lot of great imagery. The image of the blue fairy crumbling is really good. It's like devastating.
All that time, 2,000 plus years, or 2,000 years.
Yeah,
just like nothing.
Of course, the iconic shot of his eyes, which is on the Blu-ray case right here behind me. If you're watching,
that's right. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, there's a ton of great images in this movie. Let's talk through some themes. Because this movie is, I feel like, really interested in a lot of different things. Like we could talk about like the like fact versus fairy tale, like what's more real. We can talk about like parent-child relationships. You can talk about AI itself, like what's AI capable of. in relation to like human
Yeah.
consciousness. There's so many
Yeah.
conversations that
Well,
you could have.
it's so interesting to think too, like how it is spelled out at the start, but like it really is just like the there's so many, like you said, that can be discussed. Like what does the woman
Yeah.
say to William Hurt's character about, the does a human have an obligation to love a child, back? And like
Yeah.
that's just the start, as you were saying, of like all the
Mhm.
questions that sort of get brought up in this film. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Was there any like theme that really like stuck out to you that like when you walked away from the movie you were thinking about?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I do feel like like feel like what does it what does it mean to be human? And or actually
Mhm.
actually no, sorry, this is kind of what it's actually something that Joe says that was really making me think about our
Mm.
relationship to technology. And this,
Yeah.
let me know if I'm going on too much of a tangent here in terms of theme, but like
No.
I
Yeah.
there's this sort of theologian writer, Andy Crouch, who I was reading. He's written some
Mhm.
books on the intersection of technology, faith, and that sort of stuff. And he has this great point about how, Jeff Bezos with Amazon promised we'll have drones by this certain date for Amazon packages, right? And like
Yeah.
obviously, I mean, I don't know where you're at, Eli. If they're doing drones for your Amazon packages, they are not doing it in Chicago
Not
right
yet.
now. But Andy made this great point. Was like, we don't have drones yet, but what we do have is Amazon Prime. So what you have are these humans who are like forced, like slaving away for very little pay to like basically get your packages to you at the speed of like what a drone might do. I mean, obviously it's not the same, but he
Right.
was making this point of like what will happen is human ambition will always surpass our means to actually make those dreams happen. So what do we do
Mhm.
instead? We create faulty machines that can only half-heartedly do the job, or we exploit other people to try to make
Mm.
that magic happen. Which I feel like that theme fits so well with like the role these technologies are playing in this film, about how we want so much as human beings, like companionship, security, but like what ends up happening is we don't really think about the implications of what we're asking or what we're doing, and we end up just hurting
Yeah.
other people or hurting the machine. And I think that's something Joe was kind of saying. I'm forgetting the line of like how they're like we're humans are retaliating, right? Because we actually they made us too smart, too quick, and too many, and like they
Yes.
suffer because
Mhm.
they become jealous. And I'm like, just that
Yeah.
there, I was like, that's so fascinating to me, of like how we treat our
Yeah.
technology. I mean, I'm here complaining about my Wi-Fi signal cutting out, and I'm like ready
Yeah.
to smash my computer, and I'm like, well, maybe if I do that, that's why the Skynet uprising is going to happen, because I'm being too mean to my Alexa or the Echo Dot or something, Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think too, like, along those same lines, well, he says too, like, that's why they hate
Mhm.
us, because we'll be there when they're
Yeah,
gone.
exactly. Great point. I'm happy you brought that
And
up. Yeah.
but yeah, along those same lines, you have like the you think about like the flesh fair, and it's like all these disenfranchised people who have like you get the feeling that they've like lost their jobs because mechas have taken jobs that they would have
Mhm.
had. It looks like all of these like kind of blue collar people, that don't have any means of like being productive in society anymore because the mechas can be
Yeah.
nannies and farmers and all these other
They
things,
don't
and
need
they
them.
don't need them anymore. And so there is like there's definitely like a conversation on like class struggles and the ethics of like at what point do like this technology making technology do these jobs go too far?
Right.
it's definitely like interesting to think about. And I think even like I remember Spielberg talking about that in one of the special features, was just like one of the things he was interested in with this movie was just that idea, like that ethical dilemma of like, what is going too far with what we create, what we like try to make our technology emulate and do. Like, where are the lines? Like, we shouldn't just do it because we can,
Right.
but we need to be thinking about what the lines are and which lines we shouldn't cross. And yeah, that's something he said he was thinking about while making this movie. So you can definitely see it and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like the Flesh Fair, I think, is a good example of
Yeah.
the results of that.
It's a really kind of dark moment, I think, and just like you're really, like you were saying, just like, I don't know, it's just like funny. We don't quite get something as colorful or like dismal, maybe. I mean, it certainly emotionally dips further as we get along, but in terms of like, it's such a unique sequence, and like, I don't know, it's just like so much there. Like, it just makes me think about, I mean, I saw E.T. very recently for the first time, so I feel like I just
Oh, wow.
can't help like think about the spaceship and the creature, I don't know, just like the othering that's sort of happening in those movies, and how that sort of plays a role here too. So yeah.
Yeah, and Spielberg's always like, you can kind of feel his empathy for the AI characters a bit. He's always like had a soft spot for people that are like persecuted and othered and stuff, and that's kind of what the AI are here. So yeah, that makes sense. As well. Yeah, I mean, you have that. I think too, playing off of that, I mean, you just think about like the state of the world. This is like a future world, and you have Manhattan underwater. And it's almost like some of the subtext there is like, I guess, have we so neglected our responsibilities to our world because we've delegated so much to robots and AI and technology that we've like neglected our responsibility for the world. And now look at it, Manhattan's underwater.
Right.
So yeah, there's definitely that going on too as well. So
yeah, that's
one of the things that I think is themes that I think is probably in there and interesting is like just like the parent-child relationship. There's this degree to which like there's this dark apprehension you can have when you're becoming a parent that is definitely like kind of there in the movie. There's a certain degree to which the movie is about just like the terror of bringing something into the world and like imprinting yourself on it and knowing that that thing is forever attached to you, and whether you like it or not,
it's affecting.
And that's what fatherhood and motherhood is. Like, you bring this thing and your child is literally like imprinted with your genetic code and your like behavioral tendencies, and like it's kind of frightening.
Oh, I'd imagine. Yeah, it's like,
so
I'm curious how this lands, like for you, especially like as a parent too, because like for me, I'm thinking about like, I mean, there are similar questions, but like as someone who doesn't have kids, I was like, I'm sure it will land differently if I did or something like that too,
Yeah. Well, I think that's like the whole idea of like imprinting. It's kind of twofold. Like you can think about it along these lines, which is like she's literally like imprinting herself like onto him, and so like you can think of it of like biological children. Like you literally like when you don't really have a choice but to imprint yourself onto them because it's biological. It's in the genetic code, but she's like imprinting herself into his computer code, and so like he's forever attached to her from that point on, like she can't, you know, he can't really be like returned after
Right,
that.
it's just
He's
destroyed, or what was it? Right, yeah,
yeah,
back to factory. Yeah.
right. And so so there's definitely like that apprehension that kind of plays, but there's also like the idea of imprinting too feels more prescient now, because when you think of like our devices are kind of like an extension of us now,
Totally.
and we're like imprinted onto our cell phones, and they're imprinted onto us, and we can't like function without them.
Oh yeah.
And
I
so
I've
that
heard someone described it as like we're very inefficient cyborgs, you know? Like
yeah, sure.
we're just we just the closest thing we don't have is like literally taking your phone and like embedding it into your hand, but like
Right,
functionally, you know, how different is it really with what's going on, you know?
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so there's like multiple like ways to like look at things, and that, which I think, you know, speaks a lot to this movie and the storytelling and all that, that it's like multifaceted in the things that it's kind of like able to explore with the story. You know, uh, obviously like there's just this big question of the uncertainty about the nature of artificial intelligence.
Oh,
Um,
totally.
like how deep is the programming? Like what is the love that David offers? Is it real? You know, can if he can love, does that mean he has a soul, or that he has free will, or does he not? You know, or like is a soul and free will obsolete concepts? Like, do they not really mean anything? Is that something that AI shows us? You know, uh, can there be love without, you know, all these other things that come along with biological intelligence, emotions, and all that? You know, there's just all these questions that come along with any movie that's exploring AI. Um, and yeah, it's weird. The David, what
Hmm.
I don't know, what was most interesting to you about like David being an AI robot, and like do you think the movie tackled that well? Do you think it explored like the implications of that well, or do you think it didn't, or
Yeah.
what?
I think it underscored this point where, like, you know, it's just funny to think about why David was there. You know, like
Hmm.
it's just so funny to think about like the purity of David's intentions, or you could say programming, in relation to
Hmm.
all these other forces around him. Like, you know, his mom, I guess I can put in air quotes, was like, I want you because I'm worried my son's not going to make it. Oh, my son's alive, and you stab me in the eye, and all these things. I'm gonna get rid. Like, you're a tool. You're just another tool, like a toothbrush or a shaver or something that I can get rid of. And then like I
Hmm.
want to make sure I get his character's name. I keep saying William Hurt's character, but Alan
Professor
Hobie.
Hobby.
Hobby, yeah.
Yeah.
Professor Hobby, right, is just like, you know, you're also serving a purpose. You're the first of your kind.
Hmm.
We wanted to
Yeah.
test you. And I just find like, you know, David's not really, he's just like, I'm just trying to be a kid, you know, I don't know. And like, there is
Yeah.
something like very innocent about that I think is what, and like you said, what Haley Joel Osment really does to like make that land, you know, the purity of it there. I think it does raise a question though about like, you know, which will impact the ending as we get into more later, but just like the
Yeah.
pursuit of these things and how it's like, you know, it's a mood thing what he's chasing after, and like
Yeah.
what's the point?
Well,
What's
it's
the
like,
point of you doing? I don't know. It's just like so beyond the scope of what's even possible, but like he's
yeah.
so single, like you said, laser focused on that. The way
Yeah.
Teddy is focused on, you know, David, right? It's just like it's a funny
Hmm.
juxtaposition there, where like you can't reason because it's programming, and like maybe there's something that's different versus like if you're a child that's human and rational, it's like you're expected to grow out of certain phases or something. But like the fact that my guy waits 2,000 years till his, I'm like, it just, and like the first thing he does when he wakes up is like right back at it again. It's like,
Yeah.
I don't know. That was like a very, this is not human, this is a robot thing.
Yeah.
That was there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the movie does a really good job of like kind of like teasing you with moments where you really feel like he's a real boy. Like, so when she leaves him in the woods, like, he's like desperately trying to like get her not to leave him. But, and it feels very emotional and like, oh, like this poor boy or whatever. Or like at the flesh fair when he's like, please don't hurt me or whatever. And everyone's like reacts to that it feels, wait, why would a robot like not want this? Like all the other robots are just like taking their death or whatever. And here's this boy like pleading for his life. And it's like, so yeah, the programming goes deep enough to like really do a good job of like fooling you.
Totally.
But at the end of the day, like he's desperate to survive or to not be left, not because like he values his own life, but because like he's literally programmed to love this mommy and to somehow receive love from her, however he's going to perceive like when is that job complete. And like he really can't, it's like a functional, it's functional, it's like a functional thing for him. That's
like
what he was made to, that's what he was created to do. And he has to survive until he's like accomplished that goal. And like the whole search for the blue fairy is like, oh, like he's really wants to be a real boy. And it's like, well, no, he really doesn't care if he's a real boy or not, other than the fact that his programming has told him that
that's a good
mommy
point.
loves Martin and Martin is a real
boy.
I need to become a real boy so that mommy will love me, which is what I'm programmed to be.
That's a good point.
And so like, but the movie does a great job of like writing that line and making you like sympathize with him as a character, even though like at the end of the day, he is just like following the function of his programming.
Yeah. Still something touching
so,
there, like you said. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so like, I don't know, to me, I've never been a person that has like struggled too deeply with the question of AI and like, can AI like love and have human emotions? Because I don't know, in my mind, it's like the answer is just like no. And because I believe we have consciousness, and I think it depends on how you view the world. If you just really do truly believe that like we're just like firing neurons and we don't really have free will or a soul, then I guess you can reach the point where you could say like, oh yeah, AI can become advanced enough where it can have the same emotions and consciousness that we have. But if you do believe in like something more supernatural or something that's not like, if you believe consciousness is something beyond, just neurons firing in a brain, then not less than that, but something maybe more than that, then, it kind of feels like just it's always going to be a simple answer of no, a robot can't
exactly
have the same thing as
no. I mean, I'm inclined to agree with you. Like, I think it's a fascinating thought exercise, but like I'm not in any way like confused about, like you said about those like, and I think it's worth as it becomes important, like stewarding and caring for machines is important. But like, I don't know, it's just funny to me. I mean, I don't know if you thought about it, it's like people care so much about like AI being treated human like. I'm like, we don't even treat other human beings well first. Like, let's just like let's think about that animals, the
Mm-hmm.
environment. Like, let's just think about those things a little more
Yeah.
intentionally first. But I hear what you're
Yeah.
saying though too about those ideas. Yeah.
Yeah. And then like there's the kind of like opposite question of like, can, you know, that the lady that you mentioned at the beginning, she's like, does the mother have an obligation to love him? And it's like, well, the problem is like he's, I don't know, he's kind of unlovable in a
Oh
way.
yeah.
He has like, I guess like he can really only be loved like as you kind of love your dog. Like you really love your dog, but like your dog is like laser focused on just like one thing, and that's like being happy that you're around. And so
Yeah.
and like
Yeah.
and so like at the end of the day, like that love only goes so far. And like, yeah, you might like cry when your dog dies, but it's different than like crying when your father dies or your mother
Yeah.
dies or your grandma. Like it's just different. It's not the same. And so like, yeah, she cries when she leaves David behind, but it's more in the way that you would if like your dog bit your child and you had to like go, you know, leave your dog with someone else now. Because that's kind of what happens. Like he hurts Martin, and so they have to like, you know, she's going to put him down basically.
Oh yeah. I
like
mean
you would a
that's
dog.
a really good, like
but-
literally into the like I don't know. That's like a whole thing.
But she instead of taking him back to the factory, she leaves him in the forest. So yeah, can she love him? It's like, well, she can love kind of like the faux motherhood that he provided her, because it's more like she's in love with like being a mother than she is with him. And so, you know, there's that whole question too. But yeah, let's talk about the ending, because there's a lot of interesting stuff to talk about the ending, and we'll kind of, I guess, conclude our discussion with this. So were you, when you were watching, did you feel like the movie was ending and then there was that whole extra like 20, 30 minutes? Were you like surprised by that?
I was surprised by it. Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm trying to think about how I would have felt. This is a funny random example, like aside. Like my friend told me one time he was watching a bootleg version of Toy Story 3, and like the bootleg ended when. Have you seen Toy Story 3? Where like Woody and the toys are like in the incinerator, and like for him the copy of the film just ended. So for the longest time, he was like, "That's a really dark way to end Toy Story 3." Obviously not the same here, right? But just like this sentiment of like, oh, if it ended with them being frozen, I would have been like, that's a really interesting, like, wait for that to happen. But so I was surprised. I wasn't expecting it. And once we got to like, which I keep, you would know this for sure, but I'm very surprised. These are not those aren't aliens. Those are like advanced AI, which is so cool. I thought it was aliens.
I think it's up for debate.
You know? Yeah, I don't know how you interpret that.
I think it's up because I don't remember in my research ever seeing like anything explicitly from like Spielberg or the people that made it that said these are future AI beings, but I do think that that's the best reading of it, based off of because when I was watching, I thought they were aliens, but then like because they're made, the way they're designed to look like how like the kind of prototypical alien design. But
that's
yeah,
what I was thinking too. Yeah, exactly.
Kind of thinking deeper on it. Yeah, they are. I think they probably are like a future, like they're basically like ancestors of David.
Yeah,
I think it's like AI ancestor, and well, no, David would be their ancestor. Descendants is the word I was looking for.
Oh yeah,
they're like AI descendants of David.
Right. They're like David is their ancestor, is what you're saying.
Yeah. So David would be like Moses to them.
That's great.
You know,
that'd be wild. Imagine.
Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting idea of like a messianic or like you're holding the history's character, sort of a thing
Yeah.
there too. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And, so like it goes to the kind of frozen underwater. And I don't know, it's been almost a week since I watched the movie. But I don't remember thinking like, oh, the movie's going to end. Like I was talking to my in-laws and they were like, oh, they didn't really care for the movie, and they felt like it had like 3 endings, and and then it just kept
They
going.
said it was Return of the King too much like it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, when they were saying that, I was like, oh, I didn't really get that feeling when I was watching the movie. Everything felt correct to me. But it makes sense. Like it does make sense that people felt that way. But yeah, I found it's weird because the tone of the ending is like it's got this sentimental score going. It's got like a very sentimental narration over the top of it, and it's this like montage of like sweet moments and stuff. And I think that a lot of people at the time especially just didn't understand how like it was basically like a big dark trick at the end of the movie, a big dark joke of like, here's this very sentimental looking sequence that ends with them like smiling in bed together, but like in all actuality, this is like none of this is real, and it's all like just a fantasy, and then he's just dead for forever now.
It's like, what was it, Stephanie's quote you said of like regression to the point of nausea. Yeah. So that whole element.
And she said it's 2 corpses side by side for eternity, 2 remnants of humanity, a robot and a fantasy. Because that's what it is, right? It's David, who is a robot, who is a remnant of humanity, and then it's Monica, who is seemingly like a biological recreation of Monica from what it seems like how they explain it in the movie. But she's just a fantasy. She's not like actually Monica any more than David is actually like a real boy. Yeah. And so it's just these 2 haunting like memories of humanity,
like out of sync, not really meant to exist and be on this plane right now. Yeah.
Well, it's this one-sided dream that exists in David's imagination. It's Molly Haskell that I mentioned earlier. She said, it's a one-sided dream that exists only in David's imagination, for the mother is long gone, and it belongs to a virtual world of memory and dream. Like this is just a dream, basically. And it's really devastating and not really sentimental at all when you really like step back and think about it. I was touched by one part where like he remembers how she made the coffee.
Yeah.
And because I was just thinking about like, oh, like it is very touching when your kid remembers some random thing about you, and you're like, oh, you remember that? Like that's very sweet. And so like I was thinking about that, but like as a whole, like it's like really devastating.
Well, that's the thing, is like he gets the words he's wanted to hear, but like not really, it's like he's sort of like settling for very much like a fabrication of that. Like real Monica died never saying that, which is just like a sad, I don't know, it's like it's wish fulfillment, which I guess is its own form of joy in some way, but like, well, I guess the point of what's
but
real,
it's not real.
Like, doesn't matter that it's not real as long as he gets to hear it, and like, and then, so like that it gets into what you're saying of like him being a robot too, and that whole element there.
Oh yeah, it's interesting. this was a theory that I think is really interesting. It could, so I mentioned this earlier, but it seems like it's like the Ben Kingsley, like AI being the specialist character that is like narrating at the beginning and the end. And with that in mind, this could be like this ending could be like this fairy tale that these future beings are telling themselves, putting like this happy gloss on an actual like bleak story of soulless love. And because like if you think about it, like these AI beings they're still linked to this past of being created with the function of like pleasing humans, but humans aren't around anymore. So what would like fulfill their function more than like excavating this thing that's like a remnant of humanity that actually like interacted with real humans, and for them that's like the peak of their existence. And so
Oh yeah, because you're right. It was like Revere David, the proximity he had to those humans.
Yeah. And they like they're like so excited about it, they'll like do anything for him. Like and so they're like recreating this moment, and you almost wonder if like they're like putting this happy gloss on this story to like try to connect with what their function was originally way back in their computer genetic ancestry, all the way back to when, AI existed with humans. And so, yeah, I think that's why like it is important to read them as future AI beings, like really advanced AI, because that reading makes more sense of like why they were so interested in David, more so than like aliens would be. Because he was like basically their ancestor. So
well, and it's, I mean, and you were sort of saying this, but just like how amorphous and bland they look, like they're just reflecting everything. But like David is very distinctly human-esque, and like has actual personality to him, and isn't just like well, it's funny because like what's that scene where Dr. Hobie's like in the beginning, and like you see the outside, and there's like that rope, there's like that statue that looks like, and I'm like, oh, that's why I was like, that looks like the advanced version of what we sort of see at the end, in a way. I don't know if it's 100% look-alike, but that whole idea, of like the statue there, maybe that's like a foreshadowing to what they'll end up
perhaps
as. But
and maybe they have like excavated that and have designed themselves to look like that or something. Who knows? And I also like wonder. So there's definitely like a parallel here with 2001, because at the end of 2000, at the end of 2001, you have like these beings that you don't ever see that are very obviously like observing our lone character at the end in this like fantasy room that he's ended up in. I don't know how long it's been since you've watched 2001, but
I remember that one.
And so like it's almost the same thing going on here. Except you see the beings observing him. They put him in this kind of fantasy room with his, with this fantasy version of his mother, and they're observing him, and it's like, well, what is their purpose in observing him? Like, is it just for information, or are they planning to try to like recreate humanity?
But they actually like speak and share.
So it's interesting. So it definitely like speaks to like, oh, this ending actually is Kubrickian in that way, that like it's almost like a parallel scene with 2001: A Space Odyssey, with that ending, and wondering like, okay, because I mean that's one thing he's interested in 2001 that he's still interested in here, is like, is AI going to be all that's left of humanity when we're gone? that I mentioned earlier. So
And like,
that's definitely there.
yeah, and what that's a really good way of putting that too. I didn't think about the 2001 connection. That might
Yeah.
make me like 2001 ending better, because I saw that last year for the first time and found it absolutely maddening. How I had no idea that third act just goes
Yeah.
way off the rails in terms of comprehension. But maybe viewing it in conversation with the
Yeah.
ending of this film makes that make sense. Yeah.
Yeah. 2001, I think like the imagery is so important that like if you miss, so I mean you have I can never say this word right, the obelisk or whatever
Yeah,
you
the
call it,
monolith or obelisk.
monolith. Yeah. So you have that, like every time you see that, there's basically like a leap forward in evolution in a way.
Mm,
And so like you see that right before he goes into like the trippy zone, like so, and then like you see it again before like the baby in space. And so it's like, I don't know, it's this weird like look at like what does like moving forward in evolution look like, or is this all just like, are we all just like ants in in an ant farm that something bigger than us is observing,
yeah. Well, it's like what you were talking about with the ending too. Like, what do we do? Are we willing to accept our own insignificance with everything? Like when we think about
Right.
like, it's just funny to think of like, what was the point of all that we saw for like, and what does that mean to David in the last 20? Like, he's the only one who, like you said,
Yeah.
has witnessed to everything that happened before, and we're just like, how do we, like, what's the point of, like, I don't know, it's just so sad. It's like that doesn't even matter. Like these beings don't even, these future robots don't even, like, we're nothing, and it's just like the insignificance of all of that. But like, it's also weird because we've experienced it having watched the past like 2 hours of the film. So it's like what you were saying too there.
Yeah, and I think it plays. I read this. I wrote down this quote from Roger Ebert, and this is actually a review he wrote in 2011.
Oh, interesting.
So I went back and looked at his. I kind of just, I didn't really read his 2001 review. I just looked at it and saw he does like a 4-star system in his ratings. And so he had given AI 3 stars out of 4 in 2001. But then his 2011 review is 4 stars out of 4.
Interesting.
That was interesting to me. And he talks about that in his like 10-year anniversary review of like how he kind of like read some stuff wrong, he thinks, when he watched it the first time. But this is him talking about that ending. And he said, quote, "Why would one mecha care if another obtained satisfaction? What meaning is there in giving David 24 hours of bliss? If machines cannot feel, what does the closing sequence really mean? I believe it suggests the new mechas are trying to construct a mecha that they can love. They would play mommy to their own Davids, and that mecha would love them. What does love mean in this context? No more, no less than check or mate or pie. That is the fate of artificial intelligence. No mommy will ever love them." I was like, dang, Roger.
That's right.
But it is, it, and I think that like really, really encapsulates like the bleakness of this ending is just like, if all that's left, if Kubrick is right and all that's left of humanity in the future is just this artificial intelligence that is like the remnant of our existence, then it's never actually going to carry what we carry into the future. It's always only going to be like a fake recreation of something that was real for us. But yeah, very interesting. I also like wrote down a bunch of quotes from a David Ehrlich review. He talked about like, he reviewed this movie shortly after like having his first child. I really usually enjoy David Ehrlich's reviews, even if like I disagree with his take. He's just like a really good writer and critic. And so like even even when like I finish it and I'm like, well, I disagree, but man, you really were convincing.
Yeah, no,
You
no,
know,
it's true. I know exactly what you're saying. I forgot
uh,
what he did recently for one, but I think that as well.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, uh, I'm not going to read all these quotes I wrote down because they're all really good, but yeah, he's talking about how like the interaction of love and time, and how like it, he talks about at one point to love something is to be afraid of losing it, and to be human is to hold on for dear life, and that's why David only begins to seem real, quote unquote, to us when Monica abandons him in the woods. Um, so that like kind of adds to your empathy for him. Um,
Hmm.
and then for going on the ending, he says, I knew that David's perfect day with Monica, a parlor trick concocted by the super futuristic robots, um, was supposed to be a happy ending of sorts, but I couldn't even agree to bittersweet. The one I watched had left me in tatters, broken on the shoals of my own too literal interpretation. And he goes on to say, it hurt because I didn't believe that any of it was true. Love outside the boundaries of time felt like a perverse lie to me. Sitting inches away from the blue fairy for 2,000 years and feeling cruelty betrayed by the promise of forever. That seemed more honest. Forever was what I wanted. I couldn't imagine how a robot being loved by his long dead mommy, let alone the clone Monica who's rebuilt for the purposes of David's fantasy simulation, would make David a real boy. I could only identify with him so far.
Hmm.
And I'm going to read these last
Oh no, yeah.
last ones too, because
I'm still chewing on
I think
this.
they
Yeah.
really round out these thoughts. He goes on later in this review to say, I used to be so jealous of his immunity to time, talking about David, and sad that he was punished for it. I thought that it made David incapable of expressing real love or receiving it, or of being real himself. But now that my father is more present to me in death than he ever was in life, and the joy I take in my son is so frequently articulated through my imagined fears of what the future might hold for him or turn him into, I can't pretend that I still have the same grasp over what makes someone quote unquote real in the first place. Time is no longer the impenetrable force that I once believed it to be, because I can better appreciate how love moves through it. And then he finishes later on to say, I still shake my head at Professor Hobby's folly, but now I'm also moved by how the android he Frankensteins together from the residual love he carries for his comatose son, who David was modeled after.
Yeah.
We didn't really talk about that, but yeah. It allows them both to cheat death. I'm still wary of how David imprints on Monica after she reads him a string of code words, but now I recognize that human parents hardwire their kids in much the same way. I'm still unsure about the fairy tale logic that allows the super robots to reanimate Monica for a single day, but now I'm struck by the objective fact of how David and Teddy's affections, regardless if natural or programmed, allows her memory to survive the extinction of our species and then become the memory of our species. In his deathless search for love, David becomes the ultimate vessel for it. And then, ending quote, he says, love doesn't exist in defiance of time. Love is the defiance of time.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting. It's an interesting take on the movie, because his take is like,
yeah. Say more about it.
On first glance, kind of sentimental, but like on second glance, really still true to like the bleakness of it all. Like, our love, transcends time. Kind of like thinking in like an interstellar, Christopher Nolan interstellar terms, like love is the only thing that can, go through time and space or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just thought that was a really interesting kind of like different perspective on how you can still see this movie as very bleak and non-sentimental, but still like be touched by
Yeah.
the implications of it all, I guess, if that makes sense.
Oh, sorry. I think you froze. I heard you say
Yeah, you froze too.
you were like it's still bleak and sentimental, but it's also the
Yeah, I was
yeah.
just saying it's he doesn't. I don't think he's shying away from the fact that it's bleak and sentimental, but he's showing like that it's bleak and unsentimental, I guess is
Oh,
what I
okay.
meant to say. And so he doesn't think it's sentimental, but it's also just an interesting perspective on how you can see the bleakness of it all, but still like be touched by it from like the perspective you bring into
Mm-hmm,
it.
mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
The beauty of the
I don't.
films in that way. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot. I think there is a lot of depth in this movie to be explored. That's like beneath the surface, for sure.
Oh yeah.
And
I mean,
we really really only scratching the surface here.
Do you feel like what he was saying about like parenting and fears and like I like this idea that he's getting at or like was getting at about love being in defiance of time, how you're like pushing against time's forces in a way, and I'm wondering if you feel like
Yeah.
that resonates. That's a really interesting idea, and I'm like, I guess I've always thought
Yeah.
about it as working within the fabric of time, but I like this idea of it being this like rebellion against the corrosive effects of time in a way. So,
Yeah, and I think I can definitely get on that wavelength. Like that's obviously like the theme in Interstellar, and it's one of the reasons that I find Interstellar like so touching. But like in Ehrlich's take on this movie, he's almost like seeing it despite what the movie's doing. It's like he's finding that in there despite like the movie actually like kind of doing the opposite of what he's saying. It's interesting. I'll link the full
please do, yeah.
I'll put a link in
the show notes. Yeah.
In the show notes to his review so you can read the full thing. But he does explore a lot of what he talks about is like really feels true. Like you do when you're a parent, like spend a lot of time thinking about your kid and what you're imprinting on your kid and what the future is going to hold for your kid, and will anything you do like matter in the end for your child and their children. And so there's definitely a degree of that. And so I just thought it was super interesting, his read. It's not even really like a read on the film. It's just him bringing his own experience and his own like I guess like his own station in life, like where he is in his life in that moment, and like the film not even meaning to, but speaking to that.
Yeah, that's right.
That like that those thoughts and anxieties that he was personally dealing with in that moment. And I think that's a really cool thing that film does, and especially when you can get like a critic like Ehrlich who can really like flesh that out and bring it to words, is that like a film can be doing one thing, but like speak to you in a totally different way than most people because of where you are like in your life. Like art in general, I guess, does that. It speaks to you in different ways than it might other people because of your experiences. But yeah, I'll definitely link that one in the. It's worth reading the whole thing for sure.
For sure, no, thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah. Do you have any final thoughts on this one?
I think the what was it? I think to your. Well, I think I was writing a note here. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I was thinking, this comes up. I think it only comes up once, but Dr. Obi's line about didn't God create something to like he made human beings to love, and this idea of like, do we want to create things in order to have them love us back, and just like this, I
Yeah.
guess it really speaks to like this need for relationship and connection that really like is underscored throughout the film.
Yeah.
And how being in relationship, whether it's like having a child, like I think you did talk about this, right? But just like that idea of even like Joe choosing friendship over function, like that's a huge
Yeah.
step. And
He did
right,
in the
and
end.
it's like
Yeah.
I just love this way, like when you're in relationship with people, it reshapes you or rewires you, if we're gonna go into like the
Yeah.
neck route, like how you're thinking about your obligations and stuff like that. And so I don't know, the exploration of that was really poignant and interesting to me here too, that you're
Yeah.
kind of getting at. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like it's a movie that like I'll like even more on a rewatch in the future.
Yeah.
Rewatching it with like kind of having the full scope of it in mind, and then rewatching it with that context. I think it's one of those movies where I'm like, oh, I'm gonna like this more if I were to like watch it again in the future. But yeah.
I want to see like read Pinocchio or like he did before, because you said you read it before you watched the movie, or was it after? Or
I read I listened to Pinocchio this week.
Oh, you did. Okay, got it.
On audiobook, so I had already watched the movie. And I was like doing the research, because obviously the Pinocchio stuff is in there, but in their research it was like Kubrick really like wanted to work the Pinocchio stuff in, and so I was like, well, let me listen to Pinocchio book to see like what the similarities might be. And it's really just like the structure of like, especially for the middle portion of like, he wants to be a real boy, and he keeps like doing these things, and bad things happen to him, and then on to the next thing,
Yeah. I want to read it. I want to see it. Like I feel like you see some of that here too, for like helpful context for the film and everything.
Yeah, for sure. I really don't have any other. I mean, there's probably tons more to talk about, but that's really all I have the capacity for after this conversation.
No. I think you did a great. Yeah.
I personally gave this like 4 out of 5 stars, 8 out of 10. I really, really enjoyed it, and I felt like it's one of those movies that like scratches my fantasy and my like sci-fi itch at the same time. And I like movies that like raise questions, and it can answer it or not answer it, but just raising the questions is fun for me. And so,
yeah.
And I thought it was really fun. Like there's a lot of like really fun just design and imagery in this movie,
Oh yeah. No, I mean, I think to your point, like I really feel like I wasn't expecting the scope of the film to be what it was, like, and I just like the ambition of it, and it's something that it speaks to both what you were saying, like the fantasy elements, the way it merges that with the sci-fi ideas too, and it's enduring questions about what it means. Like I think it doesn't time itself in a way, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
So yeah, all that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. It does feel like, in fact, I think I heard someone say this, was that like it feels like kind of timeless movie in the way, even though it's like timeless in the sense that like you can watch it now or like 25 years from now, and it'll probably like read the same. So yeah, I think that's cool.
Oh, totally. That's why you gotta revisit this one later. Like
yes, I plan on
down
it.
the line,
like probably like a couple years down the road,
totally.
maybe.
What season of Establishing Shot will you be on at that point? Do you think? If you at the rate,
it depends on the directors. I do.
I mean, Spielberg's great because it's a long. There's a lot of stuff
long.
There.
Yeah. This one's lasting a while, and so
it's wonderful.
I guess this is still. I guess if you're going by seasons, this would be like, I guess, quote unquote, season 3, because it's my 3rd director.
Yeah.
So yeah, So yeah, it depends on the director. Pick a
how many
director that has
directors?
3 movies. It's a quick
It's a quick
season.
season. That's right. I didn't think about that.
I could do a Jordan Peele.
See, exactly. There you go. Ryan Coogler or something.
season.
You know, it's very much there. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, those might be fun to do because then whenever they release new ones, you can jump back in and do the new one.
Oh,
but,
yeah.
Yeah. It's fun to do ones that have a complete filmography. Or Spielberg still, I think, has some movies in the docket, but his filmography is mostly complete.
Yeah, no, it's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Apart from the occasional, one that's going to be there. Yeah.
Where does this one sit for you, like, out of all the Spielberg movies you've seen? Is it like, would you say like top tier, middle tier, bottom tier?
You know, I will say, as tends to happen, I feel like while ending the film, I was it was like for similar things you described. I was like, well, I've seen a lot of these scenes explored already, you know.
Yeah.
I don't know how I feel about stuff, but after talking with you about it, I think it would sit on the higher tier. Yeah. I mean, I think there's still a lot of his that I haven't, you know, seen. That's why I'm happy to have come back for the season, because I forgot what options you gave me, but I was like, oh, I want to use one where like I want to actually see, you know, or like I haven't seen,
I like that
and stuff like that. Like I haven't seen anyway. Like basically, well, I guess what I'm trying to say is I haven't seen a lot of his other sci-fi, like The War of the Worlds or Minority Report and stuff like that. But from the things I've seen, I'm like, I kind of get it gets the Amblin magic, you know, that I really like that's here. So high tier for sure. I can,
Yeah. I feel similar. I have some like 5-star and 4.5-star movies. And so this really like sits right under those. So it's like, I think I have it right now, my top ranked like 4-star.
For
Spielberg movie.
That's great.
So it's probably like, sitting at like 5 or 6. Am I right?
Oh, that's
I just
pretty good.
really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
It's like sitting right there with Empire of the Sun, which was my other film that like I didn't expect to like as much as I did, but really enjoid it.
Yeah.
So
that's great.
Yeah.
Is your list on Letterboxd, by the way, or is it still something?
It is.
Okay. I just want to
it's
look it up real quick.
I'll link it. You know, it's probably good for the audience to know too. The listeners, I do link it in the episode description of like all the Spielberg episodes.
Yeah, that's right.
My like rankings list. It's like an ongoing an ongoing list.
An ongoing list. Yeah.
But yeah, I have 35 movies on there right now. So it includes like movies that I haven't covered yet that I've seen.
Totally.
So I haven't covered 35 movies yet, and his shorts are on here, and his TV movies. So, they had it's still on here. Sometimes Letterboxd pulls from the movie database, and so sometimes like movies will get pulled from there if they don't quite fit into the categories that they're supposed to. So like right now, there's his episode of Columbo that he did is on here.
Yeah.
And so I have it ranked. But like it very well might like disappear because like technically that's a TV episode, even though it's 77 minutes long. And sometimes like the movie database like sees, because it's one of those things where listeners can like add stuff or change stuff, or users can change stuff in there. And so that might disappear.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love it.
But I mean that's really all I have for this week for that. I don't really have anything else to say about AI. I'm at capacity, but lucky for you, the listener, you get to hear us talk more about AI next week because we're doing a AI movie draft. So yeah, I'm really excited about that. Should be fun. So look forward to that, to extending our discussion of AI, the topic, not the movie, into next week.
That's right.
But that's all I have for this week. It's great having you on again, Zachary. Thanks for joining me. That's all we got.
Yeah. Thank you.
So I've been Eli Price for Zachary Lee. You've been listening to The Establishing Shot. Yeah. We'll see you next time.
We were happy here. For a little while.
But look, I figure it this way. Better to be king for a night, then schmuck for a lifetime.